The King's Avatar audiobook by Kevin Chapter 1581. 3-minute coincidence translator. Namyami editor. Namyami, it was as if a tempest had suddenly burst onto the scene, a match between Yiziu and Joe Zekai. The former versus current number one would be a sensational confrontation. But at first, even the news reporters didn't have high hopes for it happening. Yiziu playing first was a given at this point. On the other hand, Samsara had always acted according to convention, placing their ace player at the third or fourth position. The likelihood of these two encountering each other in the group arena was minuscule. Even if Samsara wanted to break Yiziu's legendary win streak, their team had another reliable 1v1 expert, Sun Xiang. Placing Sun Xiang first, and then having Joe Zekai guard the third or fourth position seemed to be a more likely lineup for Samsara. Sun Xiang and Yiziu had a lot of history between them as well, but their confrontation had already peaked at the Challenger League Finals last season. Yiziu had left Excellent Era, and then led Happy to eliminate Excellent Era. It was a fierce slap in the face to Excellent Era and his successor, Sun Xiang. The story had ended, and the media had been satisfied with the conclusion. Bringing it up again wouldn't bring anything new to the table. But seeing that it was unlikely for a confrontation between the current and former number one player, it seemed like they would have to settle for the next best thing. They could talk about Sun Xiang's growth in Samsara, whether he had walked out from the shadows of his past failures, and so on. As it turned out, there was no need for any of that, and the media wasn't at all sorry. Compared to a match between the former and current number one player, who cared about a revenge story for Sun Xiang. The reporters were ecstatic. Everyone was excited. Even the people who felt like Samsara's arrangements might not be the most optimal move were hyped for the match. Yiziu had once been the dominant number one player in glory, but after his retirement, Joe Zekai had taken that title for himself. Between the two, who was truly number one? The outcome of a 1v1 between the two players would be the most persuasive support for one side, even if making a conclusion from a single match was rather negligent. Why hasn't it started yet? Both players had entered their respective player booths, but it wasn't yet time for the scheduled match to start. Their thoughts showed how hyped they were for this match. To think they would send Joe Zekai to start. The pro players were discussing this topic amongst each other as well. They were very curious too. But today's referee wouldn't be swayed by the hype. He knew that everyone was waiting impatiently to see the fight, but he still followed the schedule strictly, waiting until it was 8 o'clock sharp. Begin. All sorts of sound effects and lights came on to hype up the audience. Was there really a need? Not really. The finals was hype in and of itself. Lights, sound effects. At this moment, they couldn't hold a candle to thunderous cheers and applause from the crowd. The characters were loading. The map was loading. As for the viewers watching in front of their TV and their computers, they were listening to Pan Lin and Li Yibo talking rapid fire. There were too many things to talk about, and the two were scrambling excitedly to get their thoughts out. To listeners, it is almost like a bombardment of words. Map, dripstone cave. Although the two commentators were fighting to speak, the content of their commentary was on point. The things that they needed to talk about were talked about. The map had finished loading. For this match, Samsara had chosen Dripstone Cave. Oh, this map. The stalagmites and stalactites in the cave aren't actually packed together as tightly as a forest, so even gunners have a good amount of room to maneuver around in. Li Yibo wasn't sure how to describe it, so Pan Lin immediately picked up on the explanation. Good doesn't do it justice. The way the stalactites are arranged make it extremely suitable for gunners. Large open areas aren't necessarily the best for long-ranged classes like gunners. Terrain that provides cover for them is very advantageous for them too, Li Yibo added, all in one breath. For Samsara, who has Joe Zekai, this map seems to be quite favorable for them, Pan Lin followed. Although Yiziu's unspecialized can play up close or from afar, the unspecialized is far more threatening up close. As a result, this map isn't as favorable for his unspecialized compared to Joe Zekai's sharpshooter, Li Yibo said. By choosing this map, Samsara takes the upper hand first, Pan Lin said. The map was still loading and the two had already gone back and forth and said so much. Okay, it's done loading. The match has officially begun. This sort of announcement was oftentimes Pan Lin's responsibility, so he had more experience timing it. Li Yibo was just about to say it, but in the end, he still fell behind. Dripstone Cave took place in an enclosed circular cave. Mineral formations were scattered all throughout the area. These were the one special feature of this map. As Li Yibo had analyzed, the dripstones, the stalagmites and stalactites weren't densely packed together. For a practiced sharpshooter, there was a lot of space to maneuver around in. It could be considered a very technical map. Joe Zekai was considered the #1 player in glory at the moment. His mastery over his class didn't need to be said. In addition, Samsara had chosen this map, so there was no doubt about his familiarity with the terrain. Cloud Piercer walked lightly and quickly. The broadcast switched it over to his perspective to let everyone see how he moved. As for Yiziu, he didn't move as freely or confidently as Joe Zekai. Starting from his very first step, Lord Grimm moved around very cautiously. He would constantly be looking around, taking careful note of where he had already gone. He clearly wasn't as familiar with this map as Joe Zekai. Under these circumstances, choosing to move in a roundabout manner was standard, and Yiziu was no exception. The only notable part was that the detour that he took was very large. It didn't look like he was planning on circling around to get behind his opponent, but rather to get as far away as possible from him. A minute passed. If the two sides had chosen to go straight towards the center, sparks would already be flying. But right now, a minute had passed, and the fight that everyone had been waiting for was nowhere to be seen. It was all because Yiziu's detour was too excessive. He probably wants to explore the map first, Pan Lin said as he watched Yiziu's Lord Grimm hug the wall and go around in a big circle. Yiziu might not be familiar with this particular map, but he should have experience with this sort of terrain. He shouldn't need this much time to get used to it. It seems like he's being very prudent with this match, Li Yibo said. Of course he needs to be prudent. His opponent is Joe Zekai, Pan Lin said. Joe Zekai, Joe Zekai. A burst of thunderous cheers erupted from the crowd. Even though nothing had happened for a minute, the passion from Joe Zekai's fans hadn't diminished. The fight between the former and current #1. They didn't care about it. In their eyes, Joe Zekai was without a doubt the best. Their excitement for this fight was because they were waiting for Joe Zekai to win and settle this debate once and for all. A minute had passed. The hype was still there. A minute and a half, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. The hype was still there because the two still hadn't started fighting yet. As for Pan Lin and Li Yibo, they were starting to run out of things to say. The map wasn't large, so if two had just been randomly wandering around, they would have likely bumped into each other during these 3 minutes. However, the two seemed to move along parallel lines. Even now, they had yet to meet. Was he deliberately trying to avoid fighting? It was hard to tell. Besides the big detour that Yiziu had Lord Grimm take in the beginning, he seemed to be actively looking for Joe Zekai, but the two never seemed to be able to find each other. Was it all just a coincidence? Everyone was speechless. The referee wasn't sure either. He didn't see any illegal conduct. An intervention under these circumstances would require a lot of courage. Moreover, this was the finals. His interference could affect who the final champions would be. He didn't want to make an intervention. He felt like if neither of them were deliberately trying to avoid the other, the two should soon meet, but this had already lasted for 3 minutes. 3 minutes wasn't that long, but on the glory competitive stage, 3 minutes of nothing was enough to extinguish a lot of enthusiasm from the crowd. The excitement for this fight was crumbling by the second. The Joe Zekai fans had stopped cheering at this point, instead choosing to mock and deride Yiziu. In their eyes, Joe Zekai was not at fault. On the other hand, Yiziu's detour at the beginning looked to be the reason. Former versus current #1. What a joke. Anyone who had been hyped for that was truly blind. Too naive. The pro players heard the derision from the crowd and disagreed with it, especially the older pros. How could Yiziu be avoiding the opponent? Especially on the competitive stage, avoiding the opponent wouldn't result in anything. Did you think this was the online game? You couldn't avoid a fight forever. Victory would be decided one way or the other. The two would have to fight. It was just that 3 minutes of nothing was indeed quite strange. Do you think it's a coincidence? Everyone was asking each other. They were wondering if it was all just a coincidence. The majority of the answers was no. Look at it from a bird's eye view and pay attention to Yiziu's positioning, Zhang Xinji said. The projection technology didn't show the match from this view, but the large screen in the stadium displayed it. Apart from the projection technology, the crowd also had a large screen displaying a live broadcast. Besides an exciting live atmosphere, the stadium provided an additional viewing experience that those sitting in front of their computers or TV couldn't get. A bird's eye view had always been an advantage that the live audience had over the viewers watching from home, and this bird's eye view revealed the secret behind these 3 minutes of nothing. Chapter 1582, Web Chapter 1582, Web Translator, Namiyami Editor, Namiyami Positioning. Zhang Xinji reminded everyone, and so everyone took a look at Lord Grimm's position. Because the map cave was an enclosed space, the bird's eye view showed 2 layers. The cave ceiling was depicted as a translucent layer that overlapped with the ground underneath. For normal viewers, it was easy to get confused, but the pro players had no trouble distinguishing between the 2 layers. After finding Lord Grimm's position through the bird's eye view of the map, everyone quickly realized what they should be paying attention to. The dripstone surrounding Lord Grimm. The pro players quickly understood the reason why Yiziu and Joe Zekai had yet to encounter each other. Luck was a part of it, but the foundation for this luck was purposefully constructed by Yiziu. Lord Grimm had been taking advantage of the surrounding dripstone to hide himself. It wasn't as simple as just hiding behind a piece of dripstone. He was carefully keeping track of what sort of cover the surrounding dripstone could provide him. As a result, the surrounding 10 units of dripstone formed a sort of net that blocked the enemy's vision. Lord Grimm would always move towards the area in the net that provided him the most cover. Under this protection, if Joe Zekai wanted to find Lord Grimm, his cloud piercer would need to fortuitously be in a few specific positions. However, what was more depressing for the viewers was that Yiziu clearly knew where these positions were, so he would constantly be adjusting his positioning. After recognizing this point, Zhang Xinji turned to look towards his teammate, Qin Mayan. Qin Mayan understood his vice-captain's intent and slowly shook his head. I wouldn't be able to do it. Qin Mayan was a player with exceptional talent as positioning, but he didn't hesitate to reach this conclusion. He wasn't able to move around like Yiziu could in this map. This sort of positioning requires a lot of experience to do. Han Wenqing explained why Qin Mayan wasn't able to do it. What about you, Captain? Song Qiying asked. Han Wenqing stared blankly for a moment before shaking his head helplessly. I wouldn't be able to do it as meticulously as him. Experience. Han Wenqing didn't lack experience. Positioning was a fundamental part of Glory, and after so many years of playing Glory, his fundamentals couldn't be lacking either. Experience alone wasn't enough to do what Yiziu was doing, though. Yiziu's positioning required careful calculations, and that wasn't Han Wenqing's strong point. What about you, Wang Jixi? Zhang Xinji asked the person next to him. Hard to say, Wang Jixi shook his head. He understood how Yiziu was positioning himself, but unless he was there himself, he couldn't be certain. There's no bird's eye view while playing, Wang Jixi pointed out where the difficulty lay. This made many of the players who thought that they could do it too wake up from their glee. But so what if he can do it? No one knew who asked the question, but there was no lack of spite in it. This person was right, though. So far, it hadn't seemed to amount to anything. What was Yi Ziyu planning? They began trying to figure out Yi Ziyu's intentions. However, they weren't the first to figure it out because they didn't know what the two teams had planned out before the match. On the sidelines, Samsara's Jiang Batao noticed Yi Ziyu's actions and quickly realized his goals. Finish him off in a burst of energy. Samsara's Zhou Zekai had come onto the stage with this goal in mind. Samsara wanted to try overwhelm Happy mentally, but Yi Ziyu used this sort of evasive positioning to destroy their plans. 3 minutes. The two sides hadn't even crossed blows yet, but even if Zhou Zekai won in the end, the momentum that Samsara had wanted to ride all the way through the group arena had already been put to a stop. Only the two opposing teams could understand the subtlety in Yi Ziyu's actions. The current Happy looked calm and relaxed. As for Samsara, it was as if a knife had stabbed through their hearts, their spirits dampened. As expected of Yi Ziyu, Jiang Batao had no choice but to accept the outcome. They had sent Zhou Zekai out first to put mental pressure onto Happy, but Yi Ziyu had already dispelled it. Next, they would just have to wait and see how the battle would turn out. Lord Grimm continued to wander around, using the same positioning tactics. During these 3 minutes of avoiding, Yi Ziyu became more and more familiar with the map, and Lord Grimm began to move a lot faster. But for a moment, it didn't seem like he would be encountering Cloud Piercer anytime soon. Just when everyone was wondering how long this grind would last, they suddenly heard a gunshot. Without any warning, Lord Grimm raised his umbrella and fired a shot into the air. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the cave. Zhou Zekai clearly heard it. Cloud Piercer stopped, turned around, and then headed towards the direction of the sound. How precise! The crowd cheered. The gunshot had broken through the previous silence, invigorating everyone's spirits again. Cloud Piercer was already moving toward the direction of the gunshot. Lord Grimm didn't move, though. He simply stood there looking around. Most people just thought that Yi Ziyu was taking the initiative to lure Zhou Zekai here. Right now, he was looking around to find his target. They weren't wrong. Yi Ziyu was indeed doing this, but there was an even deeper level. With how Yi Ziyu positioned himself, he knew exactly which spots Cloud Piercer could come from. As a result, when he looked around, he was only paying attention to these few spots. He was ready to attack the moment Cloud Piercer appeared. Some of these spots were farther than others. The farthest one could be considered mid-range. Yi Ziyu hadn't fired the gunshot at any random moment. He had specifically picked this location. At this position, when he and Zhou Zekai finally found each other, the two would be at a relatively close distance, which was more advantageous for his unspecialized. These 3 minutes of avoiding Zhou Zekai hadn't just been to get rid of the psychological pressure from Samsara, but also to pull the snake from its hole and seize the initiative. Cloud Piercer appeared. Of the several possible spots, Cloud Piercer rushed out from one that was neither the farthest nor the closest. Bang bang, 2 gunshots. Yi Ziyu had carefully thought up plans for each of the several spots. As soon as he saw Cloud Piercer, he immediately attacked. After firing twice, Lord Grimm rushed out. But suddenly, the glimpse of the gray windbreaker that he had seen disappeared from his sight. Zhou Zekai had seen Lord Grimm, but he didn't immediately attack. Cloud Piercer seemed to be in a hurry, quickly dashing past that spot. He had only appeared for an instant before disappearing. Yi Ziyu had tried to seize the initiative, but Cloud Piercer was unexpectedly already gone. Chapter 1583, Fake Shield. Chapter 1583, Fake Shield. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. The average viewer wasn't able to catch this subtlety. From what they saw, the two had finally come across each other. Yi Ziyu made the first move, while Zhou Zekai nimbly evaded it. On the other hand, the pro players also knew that Yiziu had tried to create an opportunity through careful positioning. However, the only ones who truly understood the subtleties within this interaction were Yiziu and Joe Zekai. 2 shots. The moment they saw each other, Yiziu fired 2 shots at him before he could even react. Joe Zekai didn't only possess outstanding mechanic prowess. He wouldn't become arrogant because people were calling him the #1 player in glory, but he wouldn't be too modest either. Modesty and arrogance could both lead to errors in judgment. Joe Zekai was confident in himself and could notice the discrepancies in a situation. His opponent had fired 2 shots before he could react. This wasn't a coincidence. This was the conclusion that Joe Zekai reached. He didn't have a bird's eye view like the pro players spectating the match, so he didn't know about Lord Grimm's tactical positioning. However, he was able to use his own way to determine that Yiziu had the initiative. As a result, Cloud Piercer didn't stop to counterattack. Without even the slightest bit of hesitation, he dashed right by. As for Yiziu, after firing 2 shots, he immediately lost his target. What a guy! Yiziu internally praised him. Through that single exchange, Joe Zekai was able to get a clear grasp on the situation. The title of Glory's #1 player wasn't purely subjective. Joe Zekai's mechanical prowess, intuition, awareness, and mentality were outstanding even within the pro scene. Yiziu understood this point clearly, because it wasn't as if he was unfamiliar with Joe Zekai. Starting from Season 5, apart from his year of retirement in Season 9, the two had fought countless times on stage. He understood Joe Zekai's capabilities and how hard he was to deal with, relying on a single carefully thought-out positioning to seize the initiative and win the match. The thought hadn't crossed Yiziu's mind. However, he was still caught off guard by the outcome. He hadn't thought that the opportunity he had created would disappear so quickly. All of the plans that he had prepared instantly fell through, but the experienced Yiziu couldn't be intimidated so easily. Change directions. Lord Grimm had initially planned on rushing towards Cloud Piercer right after firing those 2 shots, but with his plans having gone awry, he turned around and quickly moved away to widen his vision. Joe Zekai's Cloud Piercer immediately appeared in his sights from a different angle. Bang, 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 bang. Sparks flew. Such dense gunfire couldn't be produced by Lord Grimm's unspecialized. This sort of burst could have only been done by a sharpshooter. Wildfire in his right hand, shattered frost in his left. The gray windbreaker on Cloud Piercer flapped as he moved. Yiziu's movements had instead given Joe Zekai the initiative. This scene was eerily similar to the previous scene where Cloud Piercer had stepped into Yiziu's trap. Joe Zekai didn't completely understand Yiziu's tactical positioning, though, so this wasn't returning a tooth for a tooth. These 2 top players were simply taking advantage of the terrain. Yiziu had done it through careful observation and precise calculations. As for Joe Zekai, Samsara had chosen this map, so how could he not be familiar with it? Gunfire roared. Yiziu was at gunpoint. That was exactly the situation that Yiziu now faced. Shua. The myriad manifestations umbrella opened. The bullet struck the canvas like a tempest, causing it to shake uncontrollably. The gunfire was too fierce. The stadium screen as well as the broadcast picked out data on the myriad manifestations umbrella. The durability. The myriad manifestations umbrella had a durability of 23. For a shield, this was a very low number. Because of how shields were used, its durability should be much higher than other weapons. A durability of 23 was the durability of a normal weapon. The umbrella could transform into a shield, but its durability didn't change. How low of a durability was it for a shield? Using a comparison was best. Glory's lowest level shield, a level 5 wooden shield, had a durability of 20, which wasn't far from the myriad manifestation umbrellas. In the heavenly domain, many knight players had the level 70 purple shield, Drenched Thorn, which had a durability of 85. and the strongest shield in glory, the sighing wall owned by Tiny Herb's Knight Angelica, had a durability of 135. A high-level shield with a durability of 23. There was no shield with a durability lower than that. The stadium screen had displayed the umbrella's durability because Cloud Piercer's fierce assault was causing its durability to rapidly decrease. 22, 21. The number was decreasing at a visible speed, showing just how powerful Cloud Piercer's offense was. "Run!" Chengyu shouted anxiously from Happy's bench. The durability on the umbrella wasn't just for the shield form but for the umbrella as a whole. If this continued, its durability would soon drop to 0, and when the durability of an equipment dropped to 0, it would be destroyed and become useless. 2019. After just a few seconds, the durability on the Myriad Manifestations umbrella had dropped by 4. Facing Cloud Piercer's burst, the shield appeared frail and weak. But Lord Grimm didn't run. During these few seconds, Yiziu's Lord Grimm continued to hold up his umbrella shield. It wasn't that he didn't want to run, but that there was nowhere to run to. By widening his vision, Yiziu wanted to seize the initiative again, but Joe Zekai already knew where Lord Grimm would likely appear from, and now Joe Zekai had the upper hand. He was just one step faster. Yiziu could only defend against the attacks. There was currently nowhere close by for Lord Grimm to take cover. As a result, his only choice was to prop up his shield. For the durability on his shield to be decreasing so rapidly, this sort of dense gunfire couldn't be avoided through just movement. There was nowhere to retreat, nowhere to hide, and his umbrella shield wouldn't be able to last much longer. Then, his only choice was to push forward and advance under this barrage of bullets. Charge. The shield form was considered a priest weapon, thus, using a knight's charge wasn't a problem. Amidst a hail of bullets, Lord Grimm charged towards Cloud Piercer. Joe Zekai had Cloud Piercer move horizontally in an attempt to find an angle where he could directly shoot Lord Grimm behind his umbrella shield. As Cloud Piercer moved, his gun stayed steady. In an instant, he had found the angle, and the Myriad Manifestations umbrella hadn't moved to adjust to his movements. Fire. Bullets flew behind the Myriad Manifestations umbrella, but there was no one there. Chapter 1584, Gunshot. Chapter 1584, Gunshot. Translator, Namiyami. Editor. Namiyami using the Myriad Manifestation umbrella's large canvas to hide Lord Grimm's movements was a trick that Yiziu liked to use. There was no way Team Samsara wouldn't know about it. Knowing about it and playing against it were two entirely different matters. When Lord Grimm held up his umbrella in front of him and used charge, Joe Zekai had recognized this possibility. He had observed that Lord Grimm should still be behind his umbrella. After all, his umbrella was mid-charge. Yes, the Myriad Manifestations umbrella was still mid-charge. But when Cloud Piercer moved horizontally so that he could attack Lord Grimm unobstructed, Lord Grimm was gone. Joe Zekai was confused for a moment, but he quickly figured out what had happened. Spirit guidance. This was the Exorcist's spirit guidance. Yiziu used this skill and threw out his umbrella to make it seem like he had used charge. In theory, any priest class could do this, but no one ever did because no one had a shield that completely covered them like the Myriad Manifestations umbrella. Even Joe Zekai wasn't able to keep up with the endless skill combinations from the unspecialized. Figuring out that it was spirit guidance so quickly was already very impressive. Lord Grimm wasn't there. Where was he? Cloud Piercer used random firing as he searched his surroundings. Bullets flew in all directions, creating a protective net around himself. Joe Zekai had unexpectedly adopted a defensive stance. However, he wasn't able to locate Lord Grimm. He had searched everywhere around him, but no one was there. How? How did Lord Grimm run so far away in such a short amount of time? Shadow clone technique. Teleport. There was no shadow clone left behind, but it wouldn't have been possible anyways. Because his Myriad Manifestations umbrella had been thrown out with a spirit guidance, Lord Grimm could only use priest skills. Spirit guidance wasn't discarding the weapon. The thrown weapon was still considered equipped even if it wasn't in the user's hands. Thus, Lord Grimm was stuck as a priest, and priest classes didn't have instant movement skills. There was only one possibility. Cloud Piercer leapt to the side. While in the air, he turned around and fired 2 shots towards the myriad manifestations umbrella. A change had already occurred over there. The moment Cloud Piercer turned around to search his surroundings, the myriad manifestations umbrella retracted and Lord Grimm appeared. Then he lifted his umbrella and sprinted towards Cloud Piercer. Everyone except for Joe Zekai saw this change. Yes, it had indeed been spirit guidance. Joe Zekai had guessed correctly. Lord Grimm had feigned a charge by using spirit guidance. Priest classes didn't have instant movement skills. What Yiziu used wasn't a skill but simply basic movement. He used his stamina to sprint. He hadn't moved far, maybe 2 or 3 steps. However, with these 2-3 steps, he just happened to be outside of Cloud Piercer's vision. When Cloud Piercer moved to an angle behind the umbrella, Lord Grimm had moved to an angle in front of the umbrella. It looked like 2 kids playing a game, but even the normal players knew what terrifying skill was needed to pull it off. The angle of the umbrella, the timing of the sprint, and the timing for stopping the spirit guidance. All of these details were crucial, and the slightest misstep meant failure. Connecting all these parts together was already very difficult, but Yiziu had done it all perfectly. It was through this perfect execution that he was able to catch Joe Zekai off guard. The moment Joe Zekai realized what Yiziu had done, he had Cloud Piercer leap to the side to dodge, but it was too late. With a shining cut, Lord Grimm instantly closed the distance, faster than Cloud Piercer could shoot. Blood splattered into the air. The shining arc cut Cloud Piercer. His guns were aimed in the wrong direction. Bang, 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 bang. Cloud Piercer's dual guns still went off. He wasn't able to stop himself from firing in time. But he immediately responded to the current situation, knee strike. Cloud Piercer sent a knee strike towards Lord Grimm. This skill had a knockback effect which would help pull apart the distance between them. Yiziu's Lord Grimm dodged to the side. At the same time, his myriad manifestations umbrella split into 2 swords, creating 2 intertwining arcs of light. Cross slash. It was a low-level assassin skill, which had different effects depending on the weapon. When 2 swords were used, the swords crisscross, cutting off the target's movement options. However, when these intertwining arcs of light flashed out, an opening appeared. Bang, 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 bang. Gunfire continued to echo, and just like this, Cloud Piercer was able to make his way past Yiziu. After Cloud Piercer had been sliced by the shining cut, he was still able to pull away from Lord Grimm. Aimed in the wrong direction, unable to stop himself from firing. Anyone who had these thoughts was gravely mistaken. Joe Zekai hadn't made a mistake. He had been aiming toward where the myriad manifestations umbrella had previously been. Miss. His goal wasn't to attack. If his random firing from before had been him playing defensively, then his Cloud Piercer was currently playing the runaway game. He hadn't fired his dual guns to attack, but rather to use the recoil to help him move. Joe Zekai was using aerial fire. People still didn't realize it even after Cloud Piercer pulled away from Lord Grimm. They thought that Joe Zekai had done something miraculous, when in reality, it was simply a result of his immediate response to not finding Lord Grimm during his search. Cloud Piercer had pulled away from Lord Grimm, but it was no more than 3 body lengths away. After Lord Grimm's cross-slash missed, he readjusted himself and attacked again with teleporting stab. In Happy's match against Tyranny, Yiziu had chosen to put flickering stab on his assassin weapon form, giving everyone a deep impression. This time he used a similar skill to flickering stab, teleporting stab. The distance was instantly closed, but this move wasn't considered a teleport. No matter how fast it was, Lord Grimm still had to turn around and take a step. It was just that it was all done extremely fast, but Joe Zekai was faster. Before the flickering stab could be completed, a pitch-black muzzle was already aimed towards Lord Grimm's head. The body of the gun was very long. It wasn't a revolver. Sharpshooter level 70 skill, Thunder Snipe. He had actually used Thunder Snipe at such a close range. The crowd was in chaos. The Joe Zekai on stage and the Joe Zekai off stage were like two different people. Off stage he was silent and invisible, but on stage he was always so flashy. Bang. Chapter 1585, Despair and Hope. Chapter 1585. Despair and Hope. Translator. Namyami. Editor. Namyami. The open gunfire seemed to be right on Lord Grimm's forehead. It was true that long-range attacks were at a disadvantage at close range, but at such close range, shots could be fired with extreme accuracy. Dodging would be impossible, something that no one could do. Poof! The bullet broke through the skull, and the sound of it entering the flesh was exceptionally clear. Lord Grimm's head exploded with blood. Just from the power and movement of this attack, those watching felt that it wouldn't be unfair if this one attack was able to directly kill him. But this was a game, after all, and everything had to follow the rules of the game. Lord Grimm's head was still there even after being hit, but the sharp drop in his health was unavoidable. Cloud Piercer, as the great gunner, had an extremely high attack stat to begin with, and as a headshot, the damage was doubled. This one attack took 1/3 of Lord Grimm's health, enough to hurt the heart. With the skills available to an unspecialized, who knew how many attacks would need to land in order to do that kind of damage to the opponent. He can't go on. At this moment, even Happy's most loyal of fans couldn't help but wonder. Even though the two hadn't exchanged blows for too long, even though Lord Grimm's health was far from depleted, the might that Joe Zekai's Cloud Piercer demonstrated on stage could generate this kind of despair. A thunder snipe unleashed at close range. Such an unthinkable thing spread despair off stage, and all those who stood opposed to Samsara felt it. Not only did this one attack deal so much damage, the momentum carried by this powerful shot affected the character's balance. The head that remained amidst the blood jerked back, as though punched, and it carried the rest of the body with it. But he didn't fall. Lord Grimm's right foot stepped back, supporting the rest of this body. Perhaps most people wouldn't have noticed this detail, but this was a powerful demonstration of Izu's skill. A snipe at this distance couldn't be avoided, but stepping back in time to support the rest of the body required reaction and response to the extreme. With this step, Lord Grimm stabilized himself in the fastest way possible, and from here he could counterattack in the shortest time possible. After all, no matter how fierce or destructive, Thunder Snipe was only one attack. To switch the long gun for the revolver again, the character still needed to move, and this short span of time was a window for Izu to counterattack. Without this step backward, he would have no way of seizing this opportunity. Amidst despair, hope arose. But only experts would be able to detect this kind of hope. Before this hope could spread to everyone, another wave of despair came crashing down. A light sound, clear, crisp, but uncommonly powerful. Thunder Snipe bullet reload. No one dared believe their ears. Glory's Thunder Snipe only had one shot. Firing again required the skill to come off cooldown. But now Joe Zekai's Cloud Piercer, right after using one shot, was already reloading a second shot. Where did his skill cooldown go? Skill cooldown. As soon as they thought of this game terminology, a number of players reacted. Dual load. This sharpshooter skill could allow a skill that was currently in cooldown be ready for immediate use. Joe Zekai must have used this skill. That was why, right after using a Thunder Snipe, it could be immediately be reloaded because he used dual load to end the cooldown. Bang! The gun fired again. It was over. It was really over. If what happened before could only be called a subconscious feeling aroused in the heart, Then this time, this second consecutive thunder snipe dragged everyone down into despair for good. The gun's muzzle spat out fire. No one could even see the bullet fly out because it was too fast, too close. The bullet would hit, blood would spatter. Wasn't that how it went? Clang. No blood. What came with the sound was a brilliant flash of sparks, sparks generated from the friction of a metal collision. The myriad manifestations umbrella was lifted in front of Lord Grim's chest. The sword pulled from the center of the umbrella was still trembling after the sparks faded. Sword form, guard. The stadium was in an uproar. Those in front of their televisions were in an uproar. He'd actually used the Blade Master's guard to block Cloud Piercer's thunder snip at this close range. What kind of eyesight? What kind of control? No one could answer this question. All that they knew was that the two people currently on stage were accomplishing the superhuman. If Lord Grimm's step back was a hope that not many detected, then this time, using a guard to block a thunder snipe, was a clear scene that brought clear hope, hope that could burn away the despair that Joe Zekai wrought. It wasn't over. It was far from over. Only a bastard would think it was over. Those that supported Happy and Yiziu almost wanted to cry. This feeling of surviving despair was too wonderful. This feeling of hope was too wonderful. At this time, the amount of time these two had spent attacking each other could be counted in seconds. But the rise and fall in emotion that it gave the viewers was just this intense. But even after successfully blocking the thunder snipe, Lord Grim's situation couldn't be called stable. The momentum from the first shot that had hit his head hadn't been completely dissipated, and although the guard absorbed the attack's damage, it couldn't completely dispel the momentum from this powerful level 70 attack. Step back non-stop. Yiziu didn't use backward rolls, the simplest and most effective way of dispelling momentum. He chose to use this more complex method, whose rhythm was harder to grasp, because he didn't want Cloud Piercer to leave his sight. An opponent like Joe Zekai, even the short moment in a roll when his eyes would leave him was enough of an opening for him to seize. And while stepping back, Yiziu counterattacked. Bang! Gunshot. The blade used for the guard was already slid back into the umbrella. Raised parallel to the ground, the myriad manifestations umbrella turned back into gun form, and fire spat out of the tip. This counterattack against the great gunner was also a gunner shot, an accurate close-range shot, stun bullet. But the distance between the two characters right now was still larger than it had been when Joe Zekai had used his first thunder snipe. Cloud Piercer was moving backward from the recoil. Lord Grim was moving backward from the impact of the attack. Even though Yiziu's shot was very fast, but distance still gave Joe Zekai the space to react. Twist the body, holster the gun. This rifle that would not come off cooldown so quickly again was put away, and Cloud Piercer once again lifted his twin revolvers. He twisted his body to avoid the stun bullet, activated speed firing, and the bullets flew outward. But in this moment, Yiziu had already completely regained control of Lord Grim's movement. Collapsing mountain. The gun was put away and the sword came out once again, not the takai hidden in the umbrella stem, but the broadsword formed from the eccentric folded shape of the umbrella's surface. With burning killing intent, flying right past the bullets that Cloud Piercer shot, fall. Chapter 1586 10 years, Samsara Chapter 1586 10 years, Samsara Translator, Namyami Editor. Namyami, the myriad manifestations umbrella in broadsword form wasn't bright and its shape was so strange that it was laughable. But when it came plummeting down, carrying a strong gust of wind, even Joe Zekai couldn't laugh. Yiziu didn't dodge, didn't retreat. Just like this, he met the attack head-on. Under the rain of bullets, Lord Grim slashed forward with a collapsing mountain. With Joe Zekai's level of control, he could easily change the angle of Cloud Piercer's attack to land many shots upon Lord Grim's body. But so what? He could damage Lord Grim, but he couldn't stop the fall of Lord Grim's collapsing mountain. In terms of attack priority, long-range attacks were no match for close range. This was a design that Joe Zekai couldn't change. Even if he could use the level 75 Thunder Snipe and blast Lord Grim's head again, he couldn't force Lord Grim back. Yiziu understood this point extremely clearly. To defeat a long-range class, he could only advance and could not retreat. Whether facing an ordinary gamer in Glory's arena or the #1 great gunner Joe Zekai, it was all the same. And so he didn't retreat. And so he maintained his forward-facing attack stance. He did so when faced with the Thunder Snipe. He did so when faced with the rain of bullets from speed firing. The collapsing mountain came down, and Joe Zekai had no choice but to dodge. Cloud Piercer hurriedly retreated, at the same time lifting his gun and firing toward the mid-air Lord Grim. He chose to dodge, but he didn't give up on attacking. But Lord Grim suddenly changed direction in mid-air, plunging downward with a speed that shouldn't have been possible with a collapsing mountain. Yiziu had anticipated early on that Joe Zekai could dodge to the side and attack at the same time, and so he began making mid-air adjustments as soon as he jumped up for the collapsing mountain. Collapsing mountain cancel, falling light blade. A broadsword could use falling light blade as well. The form wasn't as light or graceful as it would be with a lightsaber or takai, but it carried greater momentum and pressure. With this change, Lord Grim's path skewed toward Cloud Piercer, and Cloud Piercer, who was currently jumping back to avoid the collapsing mountain, could not easily change direction again. But the current controller of Cloud Piercer was Joe Zekai, that Joe Zekai who was said to be able to do anything on stage except heal. He was actually able to react fast enough to keep up with Lord Grim's swift change from collapsing mountain to falling light blade. The bullets he fired from the gun he just lifted were knocked away by the falling light blade, but then he was already moving. Characters in midair especially relied on recoil to adjust their movement. This whole process took less than a second, yet the two of them fought with so many changes, so many inputs. What level of technique was this? The broadcast wished to show stats of the two players' hand speeds, but by the time they displayed this data, that moment had already passed. They just couldn't catch up to the battle rhythm. All of this had happened in the span of time Cloud Piercer took to jump back once. Cloud Piercer landed and immediately looked for a direction to roll. Even though he had adjusted his aim precisely, he could only damage Lord Grim. It wouldn't impact his skills very much. Immediately after, Lord Grim landed, and the force from the falling light blade expanded. Cloud Piercer, who had started rolling, couldn't avoid all of the damage, but he was able to dispel the effects of the attack with the greatest speed. When his roll was halfway through, two muzzles were already pointing at Lord Grim from the ground. This kind of attitude was very similar to Yiziu's mindset when he stepped backward after the Thunder Snipe to stabilize himself. At any moment, both of them were working hard to find an opportunity to attack. In a situation where only half a step of retreat was necessary, no one would retreat any further, not even an inch. Gunshot. Gunfire burst forth from the muzzles of the revolvers. At this moment, Cloud Piercer and Lord Grim were already within melee range of each other, but even in this kind of small space, Lord Grim actually didn't have control over the situation. Cloud Piercer was supposed to be better at long range, but his gunshots didn't stop. It was as though he carried two knives in his hands, that spitting fire and those non-stop bullets serving as sharp blades, accurately slicing any enemies that dared approach. At this point, he had already broken past the idea of gun fu. This wasn't a combination of taijutsu and gunfire. Joe Zekai's gunfire had become a form of taijutsu, thanks to his extreme control taking precision to the limit. Too strong. In the broadcast, Pan Lin couldn't hold himself back, forgetting himself as he shouted. because he believed that he was far from the only one who had fallen into the craze of this moment. The entire glory world was probably trembling from this scene. Long range, short range, two completely different kinds of classes, but under Joe Zekai's control, this wall built into the game was actually broken. His cloud piercer danced with his gunfire like a close-range class. Wildfire, shattered frost, they spat out not individual bullets but a tight and continuous stream. They were the searing and deadly blades in Joe Zekai's hands. Brilliant, beautiful, unbelievable, all sorts of praise tumbled from Pan Lin's mouth. This is the summit, this is a revolution. I think that even Yi Xiu would have to admit this point. Yes, worthy of being glory's #1. Li Yibo hurriedly broke in before Pan Lin could steal away all the words and spotlight. But would someone misunderstand? Would anyone not know the person about whom Li Yibo was talking? Of course not. The person he was talking about was of course Joe Zekai, only Joe Zekai, the Joe Zekai who could break through the very fundamentals of glory's design through sheer skill. The #1 in glory was him. Li Yibo directly gave this conclusion. Facing Yi Xiu, the Yi Xiu who repeatedly surprised and humbled them, Li Yibo still dared to declare this without hesitation. All of those lessons and experiences from before, he no longer remembered them. In their eyes there was only the sheer strength that Joe Zekai displayed. 1,000 troops and 10,000 horses couldn't stop him. How could a mere Yi Xiu? Yes, a mere Yi Xiu. Right now everyone saw nothing but Joe Zekai's stunning, jaw-dropping performance. Yi Xiu, or a wooden dummy, a scarecrow, it didn't matter. He was just a backdrop, a not-too-bad backdrop serving to augment the protagonist. Too powerful, too brilliant, too beautiful, too unbelievable, the summit, a revolution. Pan Lin said that even Yi Xiu would have to admit this point. Yes, Yi Xiu very much admitted it. It was indeed very powerful, very brilliant, very beautiful, very unbelievable. But the problem was this kind of incredible power, brilliance, beauty. He had already experienced it 10 years ago. 10 years ago he had experienced it all. If not for an accident, this brilliance should have stepped onto this stage 10 years ago. 10 years, samsara. Chapter 1587. Glory's Greatest. Chapter 1587. Glory's Greatest Translator. Namyami Editor. Namyami. This confrontation had everyone on the edge of their seats. Even neutral viewers who were indifferent to both teams felt exceptionally anxious right now. But the most anxious were still those audience members directly affected by the atmosphere of the audience, as well as the players of the two teams who'd been sitting in the player areas for a while now. When Joe Zekai broke through the class design barrier and controlled Cloud Piercer to wield his bullets like swinging blades, the stadium had gone wild. Countless people had jumped up, cheered, hollered. Samsara's power reached its peak, and even the Samsara players on the sidelines had burst into smiles. They were very strong, strong enough to directly push Joe Zekai into #1, but they weren't blindly confident. Competition had wins and losses, and even Joe Zekai couldn't win every single match he was in. Joe Zekai had stumbled in front of seemingly weak opponents before, and the opponent he now faced was Yi Xiu, the glory textbook, the former #1. It wasn't until Joe Zekai demonstrated this absolutely powerful stance that the Samsara players allowed themselves to relax, revealing smiles that anticipated victory. They relaxed, but happy grew even more anxious. To be able to use gun attacks as close combat attacks, the ferocity that Joe Zekai demonstrated was clear and earth-shaking. Any glory fan could feel it. In this moment, Chen Guo hoped she was wrong. She hoped that her judgment would once again become a joke because her skill level wasn't high enough. But when she looked at everyone else, Wei Chen, Fang Rui, the shock written on their faces was the same as hers. Unfortunately, this time she wasn't wrong. Unfortunately, Joe Zekai was truly strong enough to shock everyone present. But Chen Guo refused to give up. She continued to search everyone's faces for some reassurance. one after another. But nothing, there was nothing. Everyone's faces were grim. It was like one punch after another telling Chen Guo that there was nothing optimistic about this situation. She looked around in a large circle, all the way until she saw Sima Cheng sitting on her other side. And here she saw an expression different from everyone else's. There was shock, yes, but aside from that she didn't seem as grim as everyone else. In Sima Cheng's expression, Chen Guo saw a sort of grief. Was Sima Cheng already feeling grief for Yi Ziu's imminent defeat? This person, who knew Yi Ziu better than anyone else, did she have a clearer prediction of the situation than everyone else? He hasn't lost yet, Chen Guo suddenly said. Even though the situation wasn't looking good, as long as Lord Grimm still had a drop of blood left, she would hope a miracle. Ah, Suma Cheng responded automatically, as though she'd been lost in thought and was suddenly jolted awake. Her expression instantly became very calm. Yes, he hasn't lost yet, she said to Chen Guo. After recovering, her face now brimmed with energy, with the unwavering trust in Yi Ziu that she always had. He won't lose, Chen Guo said firmly. Hasn't lost yet became won't lose. This was a wish, a hope, a trust, but there really weren't many who could do the same. In the live broadcast, Pan Lin and Li Yibo already declared Yi Ziu's death, and were going back and forth discussing Zhou Zekai's deadly skill. Because of this, Glory might have to undergo a massive rebalancing in the next update, Pan Lin chuckled. His tone was carefree, as though there were no tension in the battle in front of them right now. In his mind, this battle had already ended. Yes, this really is a game changer. Compared to forcing the Alliance to change its rules, forcing the Glory developers to change the game's design is much more drastic, said Li Yibo. Yes, he really is too strong. Pan Lin had used this phrase, too strong, countless times by now. Yes, too strong. But too strong didn't mean invincible. It was only too strong, not the strongest. The bullets traced blade-like paths in the air, and amidst it all, Lord Grimm suddenly tilted his body. The myriad manifestations umbrella in his hands came apart into two pieces, tonfa form, and at the same time his body trembled. Reinforced iron bones. Lord Grimm didn't dodge, instead suddenly using this skill. Instantly, countless bullets landed directly upon his chest, as though many slashes were cutting into him again and again. Blood spurted. Lord Grimm continued to step forward. He charged through the blood filling the air, his umbrella again shifting to another fighter-class weapon, the claw, and his right hand swiftly thrust forward. Cloud body strangle. Cloud piercer hurriedly retreated. It might have been a step backward or a jump backward, but no one would know. Because this cloud body, this strangle had come so quickly, so suddenly, Zhou Zekai had made the inputs, but Cloud Piercer didn't have the chance to display the movement. Lord Grimm's right hand was already tightly gripping his throat. Everyone was stunned. How had the elegant and game-changing Great Gunner been caught by a crude strangle just like that? But this didn't affect his attack, did it? Everyone could see that, although Lord Grimm had rushed forward to seize Cloud Piercer's twin revolvers were still tightly pressed against Lord Grimm's body. Strangle could restrict the opponent's movement, but not their attack. Right now, Zhou Zekai didn't even need to aim in order to fire like crazy. In this moment, how much of Lord Grimm's health could he destroy? Pang! A dull sound, a gunshot. No, it was Lord Grimm bashing his head directly against Cloud Piercer's. Immediately, blood began streaming down his forehead. Headbutt. A brawler's skill. Only the street-dwelling brawlers would use anything as weapons in a scuffle, even their own heads. This was how they survived the violent street life. Zhou Zekai's vision swayed, but even so, Cloud Piercer's revolvers were still steady, and the sound of gunshots was as strong as ever. But Lord Grimm's knee was already connecting with Cloud Piercer's abdomen, the force of the impact bending his entire body in half. Knee attack. Under the effect of this half-grab skill, Cloud Piercer finally had no way of maintaining his posture. When his body bent, his arms naturally came down and his bullets swept the ground. Then there was an elbow coming down heavily upon the back of Cloud-Piercer's lowered head. As Cloud-Piercer crumpled downward, Lord Grim's other hand was already forming a fist, and an uppercut sent him back into the air. Strangle, headbutt, knee attack, elbow, uppercut. They were all brawler skills, and aside from headbutt, the other four were all sub-level 20 skills. Yet the combination of these attacks managed to break Joe Zekai's remarkable technique. Those shouting and cheering earlier now seemed as though a fist had been shoved in their mouth, rendering them speechless. Chen Guo was excited. No wonder this was Yiziu, as expected of Yiziu. This was the Yiziu that never let her down. "Amazing," she shouted. "It is." Suma Cheng smiled gently. Just like how she wasn't too panicked before, right now she didn't seem too excited. When she had seen Joe Zekai's exceptional technique earlier, she had indeed gotten somewhat lost in thought. She thought of her now-deceased older brother Sumukyu, also using a sharpshooter, also possessing incomparably elegant skill and technique. At the same time, she couldn't forget that shock when his sharpshooter autumn tree had been sent sprawling to the ground by Yiziu's one autumn leaf. Fuck! That was the only time Suma Cheng had ever heard Sumukyu swear. For someone like him with such beautiful technique to lose like this, he was surprised, flustered, and exasperated. Could your fighting be any cruder? Suma Cheng still remembered the mockery that Sumukyu had often thrown at Yiziu. The two of them had never gotten tired of fighting back and forth, using all sorts of classes and all sorts of characters. Sumukyu had even specifically gotten a little notebook to write down the win-loss record between the two of them. He gave it to Suma Cheng to take care of. "Don't look." Yiziu had wanted to see it, but he never got permission. "We're basically tied, there's nothing to look at." That was what Sumukyu always said, but Suma Cheng, as the one holding the notebook, of course knew that Yiziu was always in the lead. They had that youthful spirit of always wanting to outdo the other. Sumukyu certainly wasn't keeping track of the win record because he wanted to display his failures. But unfortunately, in the end, he had been unable to tie the score. The notebook had been taken away with the rest of Sumukyu's belongings, but Suma Cheng would sometimes think if they had managed to continue playing, play all the way until now, play for these 10 years, then what kind of record would that notebook hold? Who was Glory's greatest? Everyone had an answer in their heart, and because of emotional bias, this answer would never be universal. Yiziu, for example, always felt that if Sumukyu were still alive, he would definitely be Glory's greatest player. This thought was tangled up with feelings of loss and regret toward the one who had passed away. But in Suma Cheng's heart, the greatest was Yiziu. Even though she also missed Sumukyu, she still believed this because this was what her brother told her, Yiziu the greatest. So, in this attention-catching match between Glory's number ones, from the very beginning Suma Cheng had had an answer in her heart. No matter what the result was, her answer wouldn't change. As soon as he was sent into the air by the uppercut, Cloud-Piercer was already readjusting his aim. Joe Zekai's reaction was both fast and accurate. While in midair, he couldn't see Lord Grim at all, but based on his experience and awareness, the dual revolvers in Cloud-Piercer's hands fired down shot after shot. Bullets rained down. That was truly the only way to describe it. The bullets that came out of his guns were all aimed in different directions, with a slight adjustment in angle after every shot. The bullets instantly poured out, covering the maximum possible area. But so what? Yiziu ignored them entirely. Lord Grim's chest remained upright as he welcomed the bullets that rained down and continued to attack. Because the distance was close enough, because the two characters were almost right on top of each other. Even if Joe Zekai could rely on his exceptional technique to turn Cloud-Piercer's bullets into blades no matter what, he couldn't change the fundamental design of the game. The priority of long-range attacks couldn't compare to that of close range. Turning firepower into blade work, no matter how beautiful it couldn't control a situation as solidly or securely as true close-range attacks. This was the most basic of principles, or, in other words, this was the crudest of principles. Chapter 1588, Simple and Clean Chapter 1588, Simple and Clean Translator, Namyami Editor. Namyami, all the cheers and screaming stopped. Only the sound of the fight between the two characters remained. The viewers watching at home wanted to know what exactly had happened, but the commentators, who had been talking excitedly just before, had suddenly quieted down. It seemed like the only thing that could be heard from them were coughing sounds. Pan Lin and Li Yibo were on the verge of tears. The two felt like they had been thrown onto the what could they say. What did they still dare to say? Even if the two had a million things to say about the current situation, they couldn't put the words together. The embellishment that the two had blurted out just a moment ago was like a whip. After twirling the whip in a circle, they had winded it around their own necks. The harder they pulled, the harder it became to say anything. The commentators were supposed to be neutral, without any bias for either side. They hadn't been excited because they wanted Samsara to win, but rather because Joe Zekai's stunning play had excited them. If such stunning and beautiful playing couldn't win, then how could the heavens be fair? The two had said those words because of this belief. Otherwise, the countless time that Yiziu had slapped their face would have reminded them to be cautious. How else could they have gotten excited and predicted the outcome even when the other side had more than half his health left? In that instant, they had indeed thought that Joe Zekai was invincible. In that instant, they had forgotten that there was no such thing as absolute victory in a match. In that instant, they had forgotten that the match wasn't over until the last drop of blood flowed. It had been the case before, and it always would be. However, breaking Joe Zekai's breathtaking four-step gun fu didn't mean that Yiziu had won either. Cloudpiercer was still in the lead by a considerable amount of health. Even if Yiziu had seized the initiative, Joe Zekai's might was no less than before. For the average player, an airborne character was the sign of someone about to get thrashed. However, Joe Zekai's Cloudpiercer continued to attack while in the air. A rain of bullets descended, making it feel as if whatever was beneath it was a lamb in a tiger's den. Yiziu didn't seem to see it, though. Lord Grimm tanked the bullets and continued his attacks. A trade. Lord Grimm had less health. A trade didn't seem to be wise, though. Pan Lin and Li Yibo thought the same thing but remained silent. They were too afraid to try and guess Yiziu's intentions. Moonlight slash, full moonlight slash, wave wheel slasher. Lord Grimm's myriad manifestations, umbrella, suddenly transformed from a fighter weapon into a swordsman weapon. 3 slashes one after the other. Light filled the sky as Cloudpiercer tumbled through the air. Even Joe Zekai had no way to steady his character facing such fast successive attacks. Cloudpiercer's shots began to miss their mark. The rain of bullets seemed to have split apart from the 3 bright sword lights, and Cloudpiercer was locked into place by the wave wheel slasher, magic rendering him apart. Vision. Joe Zekai understood that this was the key point. He could only make the appropriate response if he could grasp the opponent's movements. However, Lord Grimm followed close on his heels. In an instant, he moved into a dead angle where Cloudpiercer wouldn't be able to see him. Vanishing step. This difficult and complicated technique was already second nature to him. As soon as he saw his target airborne, he would use this technique out of habit to continue the combo. Even in the pro scene, there were many players who were helpless against vanishing step, but Yiziu wasn't so naive to think that Joe Zekai would be one of them. He recognized Joe Zekai's skill clearly. Whether it worked or not, he had to at least try. It was an ideology that both of them agreed on. Joe Zekai wasn't able to see his target, but by process of elimination, he had a rough idea of Lord Grimm's position. Cloud-piercer wasn't able to turn his head towards that direction, but his hands were more nimble than his head. The trustworthy guns in his hands, wildfire and shattered frost, instilled fear into anyone who saw them, the guns of the Gunner King. Fire burst out. This time, he wasn't spreading out his attacks to cover more area. He was aiming precisely towards his dead angle. Bang, 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 bang. Bullets descended. The distance was too close, and Yiziu didn't have time to react to it. However, he had never intended on dodging. Bullets could hurt him, but they couldn't stop him from attacking the transforming myriad manifestations. Umbrella struck Cloud-piercer repeatedly. Because of these destructive hits, the once precisely aimed gunfire once again became scattered. Joe Zekai's situation isn't looking good. Pan Lin finally braved it out and spoke once he saw that Yiziu had the upper hand. Before Li Yibo could finish his sentence, he shut his mouth and stared with wide eyes. Lord Grimm's combo had made Cloud-piercer lose his aim. His bullets no longer followed a straight path but rather an arc. Curve firing, Pan Lin shouted. Curve firing wasn't a technique but rather a sharpshooter skill. Of the 4 gunner classes, sharpshooters emphasized firing technique. Many of their skills were buffs. For example, rapid firing and burst firing. For a period of time, the skills gave the user increased firing speed or critical hit chance. Curved firing made the bullets curve. How much the bullets curved was set by the system by default, but the user could manually control it too. Joe Zekai had Cloud-piercer use curved firing while in an airborne state. Despite losing control of his aim due to Lord Grimm's attacks, many of the curved bullets still headed towards Lord Grimm. Joe Zekai had taken into consideration the fact that Lord Grimm would be comboing him, so he used curved firing as a counter. He wasn't so godly that he could accurately calculate the trajectories of all of the bullets, but with so many bullets being fired, some of them were bound to hit. It hadn't been easy for Pan Lin and Li Yibo to resume their commentating, but now they had been stopped in their tracks again. Today's situation was looking grim. No matter which side they talked about, they would immediately be slapped in the face. The two wanted to cry. What should they do? It wasn't like they could stay silent, no. The two were quiet, but the crowd wouldn't be. Those curved bullets flew around like wild bees, completely unpredictable. Yiziu could only try his best to dodge them, but many of them still landed. However, curved firing only affected the trajectory. It didn't increase the damage or have any other effects. As a result, Lord Grimm could still continue his attacks. Sky Strike. The myriad manifestations umbrella transformed into a spear and swung upwards towards the falling Cloud-piercer. Just when it looked as if it was about to hit, Cloud-piercer's dual guns suddenly turned towards him and fired 2 shots. The recoil made him move away slightly, and this slight displacement was enough for Lord Grimm's Sky Strike to miss. The skilled are bold. Joe Zekai could have obviously done it earlier, utilizing the recoil to adjust himself while in the air, but he didn't because he knew that Yiziu would certainly have countermeasures. He had intentionally waited for Yiziu to act first before doing this at the very last moment, so Yiziu wouldn't have time to readjust his attack. Finally, Cloud-piercer was back on the ground. Cloud-piercer landed and rolled, but before he could get up, he saw a grenade out of the corner of his eye. Boom! The grenade exploded and Cloud-piercer was thrown to the side. Cold light flashed. Lord Grimm used Shining Arc to close the distance, upward slash. Cloud-piercer was in the air again. He wasn't able to dodge it. Samsara's fans felt a blow to their hearts. They watched as their ace player used everything at his disposal while taking a beating, yet still failed to escape. Bang, 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 gunfire sounded again. Joe Zekai refused to give up, but everyone had noticed long ago that his attacks had no effect on Lord Grimm's offense. Lord Grimm simply took the hits and continued attacking. "This isn't good, right?" Pan Lin carefully expressed. Li Yibo didn't even follow up. The fight between the two number ones was truly too high level for them. They talked about this, but it was wrong. They talked about that, but they weren't sure. At this point, he and Pan Lin basically existed to get their faces slapped. It was too humiliating. Unfortunately, the one to suffer the most would be Pan Lin. After all, Li Yibo was considered an invited guest. His status was slightly higher, so while it might be okay for Li Yibo to not say anything, it was not okay for Pan Lin. Pan Lin could only brace himself and blabber away. "He has no way to force Yiziu back." Pan Lin's voice was like a mosquito, and this time he was right. Yiziu couldn't be forced back. Lord Grimm continued to attack. He wasn't afraid of this sort of competition. Joe Zekai understood this point too, and he hadn't been hoping that he could force Yiziu to retreat because he understood Yiziu's thoughts. The priority of close-ranged skills was far higher than long-ranged skills. Joe Zekai hadn't forgotten this kind of basic knowledge. He didn't think his bullets could compete with close combat from an unspecialized. Everyone else had been cheering excitedly because it had seemed like Joe Zekai had broken the seemingly unshakable barrier between close-ranged and long-ranged classes. However, Joe Zekai knew clearly that it was because he had no other choice. Lord Grimm had been too close to him. It wasn't good for sharpshooters to get closed in on. It was logic that even a noob in glory would know. But everyone had believed in him because he was Joe Zekai, and there was nothing he couldn't do apart from healing. That was why, although it was common sense that the situation had been unfavorable for a sharpshooter, it shouldn't be a problem for Joe Zekai. Even if his opponent had closed in, the one to be taught a lesson would be the opponent. In reality, it had indeed been the case numerous times. Even when Joe Zekai's opponents were able to close, they would often be the ones who lost. Joe Zekai didn't become arrogant, though. Others could believe that his sharpshooter was invincible even in close combat. He himself couldn't. It wasn't good for sharpshooters to get closed in on. Joe Zekai, the current #1 player, hadn't overlooked this logic that even a noob understood. When he played, he would still follow this principle. After being closed in on by Lord Grimm, he had been trying to get away. However, while running away, he wouldn't miss an opportunity to injure his opponent. That was why he had used Thunder Snipe earlier and given Cloud Piercer a nearly 33% health lead. With this lead, Joe Zekai began to use Gun Fu to fight because at that time, he had decided to trade health for health. In other words, the thought that he could completely suppress Yiziu with Gun Fu hadn't even crossed his mind. The reason that he had used Gun Fu was to trade. Trading meant that I hit you, and you hit me. The Gun Fu was like this, and it was the same afterwards even when Yiziu seized the upper hand. However, Joe Zekai never let go of any opportunities to injure Lord Grimm. By relying on this sort of accumulation of damage along with Cloud Piercer's health lead, even in these disadvantageous trades, he would be the one to win in the end. Joe Zekai was certain of it. As for all that flashiness, that was just a service to the plain and simple glory principle. The one with more health bullied the one with less. Chapter 1589 Trade Chapter 1589 Trade Translator Namyami Editor Namyami. Those who supported Yiziu or those who worried for Joe Zekai didn't quite understand the current situation. From start to finish, the only ones who remained unaffected were Team Samsara and Joe Zekai's teammates, because they understood Joe Zekai's personality and play style. Their captain, who was considered the #1 player in glory, was never arrogant. Fighting close-ranged as a long-ranged class, that would be the epitome of arrogance. How could their captain entertain such a useless thought? If Joe Zekai decided to play in such a way, that simply meant it was necessary. So that's what he did. Cheers and screams were fine. After all, it was indeed an incredibly beautiful display of skill. But if you had to say that it was the pinnacle of glory or a revolution, that would be nonsense. Even Samsara snorted disdainfully at Pan Lin's word choice, and then when Yiziu slapped him in the face, they rejoiced at his misfortune, because they were the same as Joe Zekai. Playing like this would be exciting for the viewers, but it wouldn't be enough to suppress an expert like Yiziu. As a result, they had never thought that Yiziu would be beaten down by Joe Zekai in this way. What they saw was a trade. With Joe Zekai having the health lead, he was trading with Yiziu's Lord Grim. Even though Yiziu had the upper hand in these trades, the outcome of these trades lead towards Joe Zekai's victory. The battle continued, at a rapid pace. The average viewer didn't understand the reality of this situation. The pro players wouldn't make this mistake, though. Quite a few of them had begun calculating the DPS from both sides to determine who the winner would be. Joe Zekai would win. Joe Zekai would win. Joe Zekai would win. This was what Zhang Xinji, Yu Wenzhou, and Wang Jixi concluded. The others who hadn't yet reached a conclusion stopped calculating. If those three all agreed, then what was there to argue about? Right now, Joe Zekai would win without a doubt. But it's risky, Thunderclaps Zio Shiken said. Everyone nodded their heads. Joe Zekai would win at this rate, and he had it under control at the moment. However, he was playing against Yiziu's Unspecialized, who had the upper hand in these trades. The slightest mistake could mean disaster. Until the very end, it was hard to say who exactly would win. But looking at Samsara, it seems like they're not worried at all, Yu Feng said. The pro players had special VIP seats, facing the stage directly. They were situated quite close to the two competing teams' seats, so they could see the expressions on each team's players. On Happy's side, there was quite a bit of commotion going on there. Their expressions were heavy. They clearly realized where the issue lay. As for Samsara, everyone there was quite relaxed. There would occasionally be a few whispers here and there, but it just seemed to be casual chatter. Joe Zekai isn't being completely dominated. Through his attempts to escape, he's restricting Yiziu and giving himself opportunities to seize the upper hand, Zhang Giles suddenly said. Yes, Han Wenking affirmed. Yiziu's situation is probably worse than we think, Chu Yunxiu said. If you ride a tiger, it's too hard to get off. It's kind of giving off this feeling, isn't it? Yeah. Joe Zekai isn't letting a single drop of water slip through. The pro players unanimously agreed. Yiziu's situation wasn't like what the average viewers thought. After breaking through Joe Zekai's gun fu, Yiziu wasn't completely dominating the fight. The current situation was the same as the previous situation against Joe Zekai's gun fu, different methods to achieve the same goal. With Joe Zekai's Cloud Piercer having the health lead, Yiziu couldn't let go of the opportunity to fight him at close range. No matter what, he had to stick close to him. When Joe Zekai tried to escape, he had to stop him at all costs, and Joe Zekai would use this opportunity to deal heavy damage and trade with him. This was what the pro players had concluded. From a certain perspective, Joe Zekai held the initiative. If you ride a tiger, it's hard to get off. It was indeed the case. Yiziu probably knew that he wouldn't be able to win if he continued trading like this, but what could he do? If he let Cloud Piercer escape and widen the distance between them, he would be in an even more disadvantageous position. The battle continued, and the two characters were both losing health. Cloud Piercer was losing health faster, while Lord Grim was losing health slower. In the end, the unspecialized Lord Grim had the advantage in close combat. Only Joe Zekai could trade with Yiziu in this situation. By relying on his health lead, his health was still higher than Lord Grim's even if he was losing health faster. As more time went on, this difference in health became more apparent. The viewers slowly began to notice it, and soon, sounds of discussion and doubt unfolded. They had thought that Joe Zekai was in a terrible spot, but from the looks of it, if this continued, he would probably win. Although Cloud Piercer is losing health rather fast, it looks like it won't ever be lower than Lord Grim's. Pan Lin carefully said. This is because of the early advantage that he obtained before. Li Yibo finally spoke. He was quite confident in his words. He had seen the critical strike from the thunder snipe. The past was the past. It couldn't be changed, no. If this continued, Yiziu will, Pan Lin stuttered. He was just too afraid of saying the word lose. We can't relax until the end, Li Yibo said. Pan Lin couldn't help but glance at him. Was this really the same person who had been fighting with him to proclaim Zhou Zekai the winner? Red health, Pan Lin shouted. Red health meant health below 10%. Although it didn't affect a character's stats, whether it was a normal player or a pro player, red health was usually a signal for danger. Lord Grimm was at red health. Zhou Zekai's Cloud Piercer still had 22% of his health left. Yiziu had closed the initial gap by a considerable amount, but it wasn't enough. Judging from their previous trades, Lord Grimm's 10% could trade for approximately 15% of Cloud Piercer's health, about a 1 to 1.5 ratio. On the pro stage, this figure was already very impressive. If it was any other occasion, this ratio would be unlikely. However, for this fight, this ratio wouldn't be enough to catch up. In the end, using a 1 to 1.5 ratio to beat a 22% health opponent with 10% wasn't going to happen. But that 1 to 1.5 ratio was an average. There were many back and forths, and not every exchange would result in this ratio. Sometimes, it would be higher. Yiziu needed it to be higher in order to win. Not everyone had these numbers, but just looking at the health, even a noob knew that Yiziu wasn't in a good position. The audience could stop and discuss it, but the ones playing couldn't. 22% against 10%. In the blink of an eye, the 22% became 19%. A 1 to 2 trade. The audience wasn't too perceptive. After all, they weren't precise enough to calculate the numbers. However, the pro players were more acute. Yiziu wanted to use this final moment to burst down Zhou Zekai, Gore Cross. Predicting where Cloud Piercer would land, Lord Grimm rushed forward to use Gore Cross to trap him. Sword light overlapped, forming a cross shape. Bang, 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 bang. Gunshots. Cloud Piercer never seemed to stop firing. As soon as he encountered Yiziu's Lord Grimm, Cloud Piercer never stopped to rest. Shooting to attack, shooting to borrow the recoil, shooting to fight at close combat. This time, the bullets formed a star, creating a ripple in the Gorecross. Cloud Piercer's attacks had unexpectedly hit Lord Grimm's cross. Long-ranged attacks had far lower priority than close-ranged attacks, so it wouldn't be able to stop the Gorecross. However, with so many bullets hitting, it would displace it somewhat. Sword light streaked across, hit. There was only one streak of blood. The horizontal slash of Lord Grimm's Gorecross had hit, but the vertical slash had missed. The skill consisted of 2 simultaneous slashes, but through precise maneuvering, Zhou Zekai was able to dodge one of them. The crowd clapped and cheered wildly. Everyone loved to see these kinds of spectacular plays, but the pro players who knew about the subtleties of this fight didn't think it was necessary. Cloud Piercer had double Lord Grimm's health. He had so much room to work with. It was easier to make a mistake doing extremely precise inputs like what Zhou Zekai had done, and a mistake could give Yiziu a chance to turn things around. Why doesn't he rush him down? Voids UC said. It's better to be cautious. Don't forget that Lord Grimm can heal, Zhang Xinji said. Heal? He can't health that much, can he? Tiny Herbs healer Yuan Baking said. With how the two were fighting, long cast time skills couldn't be used. As a result, the only instant that Lord Grimm's unspecialized could do was a small cure. Everyone immediately remembers that Yiziu could add other healer skills onto his myriad manifestations umbrella, such as Great Cure or Holy Cure. Although these would be at most level 1, instant heals healed a lot of health but had extremely long cooldowns. Even at level 1 with both players at such low health, it could be enough to save him. Is he planning on healing? The pro players started getting nervous. They realized that the battle would be decided here. Chapter 1590, Attack Chapter 1590, Attack Translator, Namiyami Editor. Namiyami, it was the final moment. There was no room for mistakes. Usually, players would lean towards caution. Success second, no mistakes first. It might not look too flashy, but those who understood glory knew from experience the thrill of it. Cloudpiercer had 20% of his health left, while Lord Grim had less than 10%. With this health difference, most people wouldn't consider it a desperate situation, but rather an advantageous one for Cloudpiercer. That wasn't what the spectating pro players thought though, because they had thought of how Yiziu could win this match. Thinking back of their experiences with Yiziu, they analyzed how much health he would have if he used small, great, and holy cure back-to-back. 4%, 5%, 6% higher. For a specialized healer, the amount of health healed would be a joke to them, but at this moment it could be what saved Yiziu. With Lord Grim's advantage over Cloudpiercer in close combat, a few extra percent in health would likely be enough for him to win. If you ride a tiger, it's hard to get off. It looks like Joe Zekai's the one in trouble, Huang Xiaoshan said. He spoke as if it was set in stone that Lord Grim would heal his health. Maybe not. Some of the pro players were trying to think of other possibilities. With how crafty and despicable that guy is, it's probably going to happen. Zhang Jiao nodded his head. He's been holding back, waiting for the very last moment to decide this match with one move. Doesn't it feel similar to that one play? What was it? Right. It was when Cloudpiercer dodged Lord Grim's sky strike. Joe Zekai had waited until the very last moment before dodging so that Yiziu wouldn't be able to react in time. Don't you think it's kind of similar? The more Huang Xiaoshan talked, the more excited he became. As for that one play, he had just been referring to a small little detail in this fight. No wonder he remembered it so clearly. When is he planning on acting? No one answered him. Huang Xiaoshan didn't seem to care and continued on. The two were still fighting, their health bars dropping. A short while later, Cloudpiercer's health had dropped to 14%, while Lord Grim's health had dropped to 5%. A single high-damage skill could remove that last 5%, but with both sides being cautious, no such opportunity was given. Their health continued to slowly decline bit by bit. Just watching it made people sit on the edges of their seat. Isn't it about time he healed? People like Huang Xiaoshan and Zhang Jiao were certain that Yiziu would heal. They felt like it was about time. 5% health was too dangerous. Cloudpiercer could kill him easily in one combo. Was there any need for him to slowly grind away at Lord Grim until death? Yes, there was no need. Joe Zekai had been playing cautiously the entire time, to the extent that he would even go so far as to dodge half of a gore cross. His opponent only had 5% of his health left, while his Cloudpiercer had 14%. He suddenly rushed forward. He's going to rush him, Wu Yu shouted. When Lord Grim had 10% of his health left, Wu Yu's had already felt like Joe Zekai could just rush him down. But with everyone talking about those instant heals that Yiziu could use, it was quite easy to understand why Joe Zekai would rather be a bit more careful. Rushing down the opponent would come at the sacrifice of a large amount of his health. If he wasn't able to kill off Lord Grim and Lord Grim healed himself to survive, he would be in deep trouble. Not rushing down Yiziu at that time showed how clear-minded Joe Zekai was. He was the same as the spectating pro players. He had considered these possibilities. It wasn't as difficult as guessing what skills Yiziu could choose to use. Healing was its own entity, and no one would forget that Lord Grim could heal. In this situation, healing would be immensely effective. The pro players had realized it, and Joe Zekai did too. As a result, he played more cautiously. It was only when Lord Grim had 5% of his health left did Joe Zekai choose to rush him down. He was confident that with this health difference, he could take down Yiziu in one combo and not give him an opportunity to heal. Yiziu was waiting for the right moment to heal. Zhou Zekai was waiting for the right moment to rush him. Huang Xiaoshan, Zhang Xinji, and many other pro players felt like it was time for Yiziu to heal, but Zhou Zekai had picked this moment to make the first move. AI. Huang Xiaoshan gave a deep sigh. He was a master opportunist. Both players wanted to seize this opportunity, but in the end, Zhou Zekai had seized it first. Was it over? Not yet. Cloudpiercer twisted his body, ready to fire. Suddenly, he saw a flash of cold light. Lord Grimm's myriad manifestations umbrella thrust towards him. Dragon Tooth. Zhou Zekai had no choice but to dodge. Dragon Tooth stunned, which would disrupt his rhythm. Cloudpiercer twisted his body, dodging the Dragon Tooth. His body was moving, but his two guns aimed true as they fired towards Lord Grimm. The Dragon Tooth hadn't affected his rush. Bullets flew out, but Yiziu seemed to have predicted it. Lord crouched. At this close of a distance, he was unexpectedly able to dodge the bullets. Then he unsheathed the handle of the myriad manifestations umbrella and used the berserker skill, colliding stab, charge. The two were only 3 steps away. For normal players, it was a distance impossible to dodge the attack. However, Yiziu was facing Zhou Zekai, the most extraordinary in glory. 3 steps were the same as 0 steps for normal players, but for Zhou Zekai, it was more than enough. Dodge. The instant Yiziu unsheathed his sword, Zhou Zekai's Cloudpiercer reacted. In a high-level confrontation like this, neither of them would just be standing still exchanging blows. The two were constantly moving. All of their attacking, defending, and dodging were done while moving. Cloudpiercer dodged the Dragon Tooth, while also taking the next step. When Lord Grimm had used colliding stab, he had already taken half a step. He would dodge it, but he didn't. Zhou Zekai had unexpectedly made an error in judgment. The attack distance wasn't 3 steps. The area covered by the strike was far greater than Zhou Zekai had expected, because the colliding stab hadn't come from the takai unsheathed from the umbrella. The takai had only been unsheathed halfway before retracting. Lord Grimm had kept the same stance after using Dragon Tooth, and then followed with a colliding stab. As a result, the distance of 3 steps was in fact 0 steps, because when the Dragon Tooth came out, the umbrella had completed those 3 steps. All it did next was switch forms. The takai had been a feint. The myriad manifestations umbrella had transformed into the strange greatsword form. The canvas of the umbrella was considered the blade of the greatsword. As a result, the greatsword was ridiculously big, and the area covered by colliding stab was much bigger as a result. Hit. Cloudpiercer had been hit by the colliding stab. This skill didn't only have a knockback. The sword pierced through the target, flying out along with the target. Bang! Cloudpiercer crashed into a stalactite. There was nowhere for him to retreat to. Lord Grimm closed in. At such a close distance, all Zhou Zekai could see was Lord Grimm's emotionless face. Not good. Zhou Zekai had realized that the situation was bad. They were too close, so close that even a class with a close-ranged weapon like a blade master would feel uncomfortable, let alone a long-ranged class. At such a close distance, only punches and kicks could be performed. In other words, fighter skills. Bang! Headbutt, another headbutt. Head against head for a second time. A punch to the stomach soon followed. It wasn't even a skill, but a normal attack. Lord Grimm's offense had begun. Zhou Zekai obviously wasn't going to just sit and let Lord Grimm hit him. Cloudpiercer used knee strike. Knee strike was a low-level sharpshooter skill. It used the knee to strike the opponent. It was similar to the brawler's knee attack. The attack didn't have grab priority, but it had super armor. It meant that only a grab skill could interrupt it. As a shared low-level gunner skill, it was considered a godly skill for gunners in getting out of close combat. But the moment Cloudpiercer raised his knee, Lord Grimm grabbed his leg and then threw Cloudpiercer onto his shoulder before slamming him back into the stalactite. Grappler skill, receiving throw. It was a dismantle skill, a grab that ignored super armor, a sudden shift. Everyone was dumbstruck, including the spectating pro players. Heal, that was their own wishful thinking. Lord Grim hadn't bothered to heal. When his health dropped to 5%, Joe Zekai rushed at him. As for Yiziu, he did the same. Yiziu also decided to rush at Joe Zekai. Rush down the opponent when you only had 5% of your health left. It didn't seem logical, rushing down the opponent at that health. That was suicide. When rushing, the amount of damage taken was often more than the amount of damage dealt. Trying to kill the opponent relying on such, Lord Grim could only use fighter skills. Among those, skills like Chi Bullet were unsuitable and useless to him in this situation. He had only had a few low-level skills that he could use, yet he needed to finish off Cloud Piercer in one go. Punch, kick, knee, elbow, head. Lord Grim used every part of the body that he could use to attack. 13%, 12%, 11%. Right now, everyone wasn't thinking about what Joe Zekai could do, but rather whether Yiziu could continue this combo until the end. The broadcast was clever. The broadcast team quickly figured out where the key lay and immediately pulled out Lord Grim's skill tree to show everyone his cooldowns. The umbrella was in its fighter weapon form. All other class skills were gray, unable to be used. Among the fighter skills available to Lord Grim, there was a big red question mark. It was the bonus skill on his claw form. It wouldn't appear in the skill tree. However, everyone knew that Yiziu had chosen to add headbutt. All of his skills were low-level, so the cooldowns weren't long. Even so, was it possible for him to chain these skills long enough to finish off Cloud Piercer? It's not enough, someone said. Pan Lin and Li Yibo obviously wouldn't dare to come to this conclusion. These two were too afraid of making any remarks towards Yiziu. It was Han Wenking who said it. He was the expert at close combat and also a fighter class. His judgment was naturally very reliable. It's probably just by a bit, Wang Jixi said. Would this tiny bit be enough for Joe Zekai to turn it around? Everyone's gaze returned to the stage. They would know soon enough. Lord Grim's fighter skills would soon all be on cooldown. He would only be able to use normal skills or other class skills. He wouldn't be able to keep up an inescapable combo. Joe Zekai couldn't see Lord Grim's skill tree, yet he seemed to see it more clearly than any of the ones who could see it. He immediately saw the opening and seized it. Roundhouse kick. Cloud Piercer spun around with a kick, but Lord Grim had already activated Cloud Body and jumped out of the way. Cloud Piercer jumped up, pulled out his gun, and fired wildly. Lord Grim's body flickered. The distance of 3 steps was instantly closed. Blade out, blade in. Assassin skill, teleporting stab. Cloud Piercer's health dropped to 0. Nice try. You were close. Yiziu typed into chat with a smiley face. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com, Chapter 1591. Establishing Dominance, Chapter 1591. Establishing Dominance Translator. Namiyami Editor. Namiyami lose, win. Samsara's fans were in a daze. Happy's fans were in a daze. Unlike the pro players, they hadn't fully grasped what had just happened. Their judgment had been very simple. Whoever had more health was winning. Of course, this sort of judgment wasn't wrong. Yes, whoever had more health was winning. The end outcome of the battle could be considered a reversal from Yiziu. It was just that the reversal had been too quick. In the previous second, the two characters seemed to be evenly matched. Suddenly, Joe Zekai's Cloud Piercer was pinned to a stalagmite, seemingly powerless. Then just when he was finally able to escape, a silver blade went in and a red blade came out, marking the end of the battle. How could it be? How could it be? Samsara's fans were at a loss. Happy's fans were also at a loss. They had thought that they would lose this fight. Getting Joe Zekai's Cloud Piercer down to such a low amount of health was still an acceptable result, though. This sort of thought was just them comforting themselves. Whether it was the confrontation between the current and former number 1, or Yiziu's legendary 1v1 win streak, none of Happy's fans wanted to see Yiziu lose. As for whether it was good or bad for the group arena as a whole, this sort of rational reasoning wasn't something that fans gave consideration to. But contrary to their expectations, they had won. Just like they had hoped, Yiziu had won. Just before, they had been constructing mental barriers, coming up with a reason to comfort themselves. All of a sudden, everything was flipped on top of their heads. Everyone was in a daze for a long time, all the way until Joe Zekai left the player booth. Reality finally sunk in. The fans gathered at the away team seats began to cheer. How did he win? They didn't know, but it wasn't important. Yiziu had won, so let's celebrate first. They could always go back and slowly analyze it at a later time. The audience could take on this mentality, but the commentators, Pan Lin and Li Yibo, couldn't. There was no later in a live broadcast. The two had to discuss the sudden reversal from Yiziu. As a result, the myriad manifestations umbrella during that reversal became the focus of the discussion. The dragon tooth had closed the distance beforehand, so when colliding stab was used, it came out at point-blank range. The greatsword form of the myriad manifestations umbrella is truly gigantic. The area covered by colliding stab is quite large, making it quite difficult to dodge. Look, the moment colliding stab came out, Lord Grimm pulled out the takai from his umbrella's handle. This small movement misled Joe Zekai into misjudging the attack. Yes, what an elaborate scheme. The two spoke back and forth, not at all stingy with their praise. The two were even thinking of the future. Whenever Yiziu was in a 1v1, they should just immediately start out by declaring Yiziu's victory. Then, wouldn't anything they said after that be untouchable? Through this evaluation, the two were able to move past the reversal. But for the pro players, while this feint was very important, it wasn't as simple as that. Yiziu, Joe Zekai. The two players with the title of number one were very similar to each other in many ways. Just take how they played. Compared to normal players who cared strongly about hand speed, the deepest impression that these two players gave wasn't speed but precision. The two were exceptionally precise. Because of this precision, the two frequently made plays with little room for error. Joe Zekai was able to perform such an impressive display of gun fu because of this precision. Yiziu dared to rush down Joe Zekai despite only having 5% of his health remaining because of this precision. Apart from precision, their decision-making and intuition were similar. When either of them took control, it was extremely difficult for the opponent to find an opening to counterattack. At the end of the battle, Lord Grimm had pinned Cloud Piercer against a stalagmite and fought at close combat. Was there no such opportunity before? No. He had intentionally saved this move for the very end at the deciding moment. Everyone was shocked at his decision to rush down Joe Zekai with only 5% health remaining on Lord Grimm. But in reality, Yiziu hadn't been looking at his own health, but rather Cloud Piercer's 14%. As they traded blows, he knew that Joe Zekai was waiting for an opportunity to finish him off in one combo. He was the same, but his Lord Grimm could also heal. The 3 instant cast heals could be added onto his myriad manifestations umbrella. However, during this entire battle, he had never used any of them. It was hard to not be suspicious. The spectating pro players had been certain that he was saving these heals for a final explosive burst. They thought that he had chosen not to use these heals before because he had been waiting for the right opportunity. When their health dropped low enough, he would heal, and Joe Zekai wouldn't be able to react in time. The pro players had been partially correct. Yiziu had been waiting for the right opportunity. However, he wasn't waiting for an opportunity to heal. Instead, he had been waiting for an opportunity to counterattack, waiting until Cloud Piercer's health was low enough for him to kill him in one combo. He had also been waiting for Joe Zekai to rush him down. When performing a rush, attacking the opponent would be the priority, while defense would be secondary. Yiziu had been watching Cloud Piercer's health carefully. He seized the moment Joe Zekai decided to rush at him and counter-rushed him. The two were fighting at close range, and a sharpshooter couldn't compare to an unspecialized in close combat. And this time, Yiziu wasn't going to give him any opportunity to trade. He would wipe out that 14% in one go. Everyone saw what happened afterwards. Lord Grimm completely suppressed Cloud Piercer. Apart from taking some damage when forcing the colliding stab, Cloud Piercer was unable to do anything. An opening had appeared because Lord Grimm wasn't able to continue his combo, but Yiziu had been ready. Cloud Piercer was only hit away from death. With a teleport, Lord Grimm gave the final fatal strike. What the pro players saw wasn't just technical prowess, but their control over the pace of the fight. Yiziu had won, a very close win, but if you considered how he had taken such a massive amount of damage from the thunder snipe at the start, and then made a comeback from a disadvantageous position, he had been the one with a stronger grasp over the pace of the fight. Of course, Lord Grimm's class as an unspecialized, and his transforming myriad manifestations umbrella contributed greatly towards this achievement. If he wasn't an unspecialized without the possibility of healing, Joe Zekai wouldn't have waited until Lord Grimm only had 5% health before trying to rush him down. If Lord Grimm couldn't heal, Joe Zekai would have likely rushed him down to decide the fight when Lord Grimm had over 10% of his health left. In the online game, in PvP, if the winner relied on a class advantage or an equipment advantage to win, the loser would often spite the winner for having an unfair advantage. But on the pro stage, everyone would exploit the slightest of advantages to win. Yiziu was no different. His unspecialized and his myriad manifestations umbrella gave other pro players a huge headache. They really wanted to be like the in-game players. If you didn't have that stupid umbrella or if you weren't playing a broken class, I would have won. But then again, when Yiziu had been using a battle mage, hadn't they been getting slapped left and right as well? The pro players applauded. It had been a spectacular fight. The winner showed terrifying skill, but the loser did as well. When watching a match, they often pretended as if they were the ones playing. Their expressions were grave. Clearly, none of them dared to say that it might have gone differently if they had been the ones playing. Game 2 of the finals. The first round of the group arena had ended. In Samsara's home stadium, Happy had won the first round. Yiziu continued his legendary win streak, and this time he had defeated Joe Zekai, the #1 player. With this win, he shut up the haters who argued that his win streak was because he was avoiding those ace players in the group arena. Even Joe Zekai had lost against him. If that wasn't enough to legitimize his win streak, did he need to play 1v2s? The Samsara fans in the crowd were silent. Their ace, the god in their eyes, had lost. He had come out specifically to play against Yiziu, coming out full force, yet he had lost. Samsara's fans weren't used to this. For a moment they were having trouble accepting reality to the point of even forgetting to give a consolation applause to the loser. In their eyes there were only cheers and praise for Joe Zekai, consoling him as the loser didn't feel right. Then, it's my turn. At Samsara's bench, Jiang Batao got up and went to welcome Joe Zekai back. Joe Zekai nodded his head. He was always quiet, so it was hard to tell what he was feeling. 4% health, huh? He's probably going to heal now, Jiang Batao muttered as he walked towards the stage. The atmosphere in the stadium was heavy. Samsara had forgotten to console Joe Zekai, who had lost. They had also forgotten to cheer to give their Jiang Batao encouragement. They were still trying to take in the fact that Joe Zekai had lost. But Jiang Batao didn't appear to be concerned. 4%. Lord Grimm only had a few drops of health left. From the perspective of the group arena as a whole, Joe Zekai's loss wasn't bad. It was just that because of how important the fight had been to the audience, because Joe Zekai had gone first to play against Yiziu, because it was a challenge that Joe Zekai had taken the initiative to put out. In the end, he lost. It made Samsara's fans feel embarrassed and ashamed. Joe Zekai had never given them these feelings before. There were even a few girls out in the audience who burst out into tears. But Joe Zekai's teammate, Samsara's vice captain Jiang Bada, wasn't affected by the atmosphere. He walked calmly onto the stage and into the player booth. The characters loaded. The map loaded. The match began. "Hello, senior, I'm coming." Joe Zekai had been silent, but as soon as Jiang Bada went onto the stage, he greeted Yiziu enthusiastically. "Coming to surrender," Yiziu replied. "No way," said Jiang Bada. "I'm here to experience how fearsome you seniors are." Chapter 1592, Healer. Chapter 1592, Healer. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. The exchange between Yiziu and Jiang Bada before the match began hadn't been broadcasted or recorded, so only those who'd been on stage at the time knew that Jiang Bada's message was a callback to what they'd said earlier. The audience didn't know anything about it, so they just treated it as a polite challenge. But Lord Grimm only had 4% health left. For a Spellblade, most wave formation attacks would be enough to knock out that much health. From the very beginning, this face-off would be a very lopsided one, but happy supporters didn't lose faith. Those who thought that a match was already over at low health, why not go talk to last match's Lin Jingyan? It wasn't just happy supporters either. Even Pan Lin and Li Yibo clearly had a lot of faith in Yiziu right now. "Lord Grimm still has 4% health," said Pan Lin. "Yes. With Jiang Batao's Spellblade, one wave formation could probably take him out," said Li Yibo. "No matter what, this was the situation. It wouldn't be wrong to explain it." "Let's see what Yiziu will do," said Pan Lin. "Heal, of course." That was what Li Yibo thought, but he didn't voice the thought. What if that guy didn't heal? Heal, this guy's definitely going to heal again. Among the pro players, countless people were already pointing it out. He always does that, the same old thing. Having this kind of character appear in the group arena is so broken. The Alliance should do something about it. Someone coughed. It was Tiny Herb Su Bin. Lord Grimm was able to heal by relying on the low-level skills of the Cleric and Paladin classes. The low-level skills of these classes weren't limited to just unspecialized, though. The other priest classes, the Knight and Exorcist, could learn them too. And reality showed that the players of these two classes wouldn't pass on this kind of opportunity. In particular, the Cleric's Small Cure and the Paladin's Recover were practically a necessity for their classes. Healing during a solo battle wasn't patented by the unspecialized Lord Grimm. It was something that these two classes often did as well. Defeating an opponent during the group arena and then hiding at the start of the next battle to heal was commonly done when it came to them. But their presence was far weaker than that of Yiziu and Lord Grimm. Su Bin's cough didn't catch much attention, and the other players were all rising in rebellion to denounce this kind of practice. They completely overlooked the fact that they were attacking more than just Yiziu. Su Bin felt incredibly awkward. If he jumped up now to say something, wouldn't that just be the same as eating these attacks? Helpless, he could only maintain his silence, pretending that he had nothing to do with this. As he looked around, he couldn't help but see someone else wearing a similarly awkward expression, looking like he wanted to distance himself. The two of them met eyes, reaching a tacit mutual understanding. Su Bin, Knight player. Tian Sen, Exorcist player. Both were priest classes, group arena healers that everyone was now attacking for being dirty, shameless, sneaky, foul, cheating, undignified, unoriginal. He's definitely going to heal, is that even a question? Look at how he's scurrying around so sneakily, he's looking for somewhere to hide, right? How much is he planning to heal? All the way. Finally, the topic had one single target again. Just in time, Huang Xiaoshan turned the conversation subject back to the ongoing match. Yiziu's Lord Grimm was currently moving, not toward the center road and not circling around. Just like Huang Xiaoshan had said, he looked like he was searching for a place to hide and heal up for all eternity. Look, he's about to heal right now. He's healing. He's really healing. Small heal, Fuck, just like we thought, he's just that disgraceful. Of course he heals. Huang Xiaoshan rattled on, far noisier than the broadcast commentator Pan Lin. How could Pan Lin dare use this kind of mocking speech to criticize Yi Ziu? Shame on him. Yeah, so unfair. We have to change the competition rules. As the discussion progressed, Su Bin and Tian Sen, as well as the other knight and exorcist players, all lowered their heads. Even though they knew that everyone was talking about Yi Ziu and had just forgotten about them for the moment, they simply had no way to face this calmly. He's still showing off in the chat. He thinks he's so honorable, Huang Xiaoshan continued to shout. At the moment, Yi Ziu had just sent a message in the chat. Are you at the center yet? Hold on, I'm healing first. Jiang Batao's empty waves had just arrived at the center of the map without seeing Lord Grimm. He'd already been thinking that Yi Ziu might heal, and with this message, the other player made it very clear. He was very straightforward, very confident. He just told him directly. But Jiang Batao wasn't just going to wait there. If he waited for Yi Ziu to voluntarily show up, then he'd probably be waiting until Lord Grimm was completely reborn. Jiang Batao controlled empty waves to move forward toward Lord Grimm's spawn point. Along the way, he changed his path constantly, adjusting his view. Because he'd watched the previous match from off-stage, he knew that Yi Ziu had ways of covering himself. Fortunately, Samsara had chosen this map, and so they were more familiar with it. After seeing Yi Ziu's tactic earlier, as long as they paid attention, it wouldn't have much effect against them anymore. Jiang Batao was now on guard against this tactic as he controlled empty waves to move forward, but he didn't discover anything. Soon, the dripstone along his path had all been carefully sifted through, and the only remaining possible places for Lord Grimm to hide were in front of him. There were 3 stalagmites, standing in a triangle relatively close together. Yi Ziu's Lord Grimm was probably right behind one of them. Jiang Batao didn't let empty waves approach to investigate. When the distance was close enough, he quietly lifted his sword and began to cast. The short sword divine chain rippled over here. Jiang Batao didn't wait for Lord Grimm to appear. Empty waves lifted his sword and swung it, releasing a waltzing wave formation that circled around toward that stalagmite. The stadium was silent. By this point, Samsara's fans had basically recovered from the emotions of Josei's defeat, but seeing their vice-captain bravely fighting on stage right now, they couldn't reward him with applause. Because, with the omniscient view, they could see that behind that stalagmite wasn't Lord Grimm, but a goblin that he had summoned. Little Lu, did you see that? If you're too simple and naive, you're no match for Yi Ziu. Seeing this scene, Huang Xiaoshan sighed and gave this lesson to his junior sitting next to him. Simple and naive. You're talking about Jiang Batao. When Misty Rain's Li Hua heard this, he couldn't help but interject, surprised. Of course not, I'm just using an example. That guy definitely isn't, said Huang Xiaoshan. Jiang Batao Season 6 debut. After joining Samsara, he began making a name for himself. Under Josei's light, the Samsara players all seemed less eye-catching. But as opponents that had interacted with him on stage, everyone was clear that Samsara's Jiang Batao was not an easy character to deal with. At the very least, simple and naive definitely was not a phrase that could describe him. Chapter 1593, A Senior's Fearsomeness. Chapter 1593, A Senior's Fearsomeness. Translator, Namiyami Editor, Namiyami Electric Wave Formation, Waltzing Wave Slash. The weakest summon, the goblin, couldn't resist these 2 powerful attacks, but so what? The viewers could clearly see that Lord Grimm wasn't inside the electric wave formation's range. By the time the lightning struck the goblin, Lord Grimm had finished forming the hand seals for Shadow Clone technique, launching a sneak attack from Empty Wave's side. But, after drawing out a waltzing wave slash, Empty Wave's silver weapon, Divine Chain, didn't stop and headed directly towards his side. Killing intent emanated from the edge of its blades as it tore through the air. A wave wheel slasher flew directly towards Lord Grim. Yiziu was caught off guard. His Lord Grim had only just landed when the wave wheel slasher arrived. There was no time for him to dodge, guard, parry. It would be useless. Wave wheel slasher was a skill with grab priority. Even if he tried using his shield to block it, the wave wheel slasher would still tear apart its defenses, locking him in place and dealing damage. A dismantle skill could work, but dismantle skills required the proper timing. Using it now would be too late. There was unexpectedly nothing he could do. All of the viewers, including the pro players, thought that the wave wheel slasher was inescapable. Suddenly, Lord Grim swung his arm, sending out a flash of sword light. Magic waves specific to spellblades swirled around the light. It looked exactly the same as empty waves slash. It was also a wave wheel slasher. Wave wheel slasher against wave wheel slasher. The two streaks of sword light intertwined. In a collision between two of the same skills, the outcome would be decided based on attack power as well as factors such as timing. Lord Grim's attack had been hasty, and the magic emanating from his sword couldn't compare to a true spellblade's. The level 20 spellblade class advancement skill, Killing Intent Wave, specifically buffed wave skills. Unspecialized could not learn class advancement skills, so his wave skills would naturally lose to a spellblade's. Lord Grim lost the priority battle. The undulating magic swallowed him, forcing Lord Grim to stagger back. However, the imprisonment from the wave wheel slasher was shattered by the collision. Lord Grim's wave wheel slasher fell short compared to empty waves, but it couldn't be considered useless. It had nulled wave wheel slasher's grab effect, achieving Yiziu's goal. After staggering back 2 steps, he immediately steadied himself and rushed forward again. Although spellblades were part of the swordsman's superclass, their strengths lay in mid-ranged combat. Close combat wasn't their class's expertise. The moment Empty Waves swung out a wave wheel slasher, Jiang Batao had Empty Waves step to the side to pull away. Lord Grim was able to negate his wave wheel slasher's grab effect, but the shockwave still pushed him back 2 steps. Even though he was able to immediately steady himself and rush back, Empty Waves had already followed with his next attack. A streak of scarlet fire roared towards him, a flame wave slash. Fire wave slash was the strongest of the wave slashes and had the strongest knockback. Forcing your way through it wasn't possible. It wasn't just flames. It also contained powerful undulating magic. Unable to get past it, he could only dodge. However, Yiziu knew that this attack was just the beginning. Fire wave slash, ice wave slash, and light wave slash. These 3 wave slashes containing fire, ice, and light were often used together. This combo was nicknamed Threefold Wave. The fire wave slash had already put Yiziu in a fluster. How could ice and light not follow? And the ice and light quickly followed. Lord Grim turned and used the assassin skill, Shining Cut. Cold light flashed as the fire wave slash brushed past him. When he looked towards Empty Waves again, as expected, it was the Threefold Wave. The second light wave slash had arrived next. As the name implied, light wave slash was extremely fast, but Jiang Batao had underestimated the speed of Lord Grim's movement skill. The light wave slash flashed past him, missing Lord Grim. Thunderous applause. Yiziu didn't know, but the viewers watching did. The waltzing wave slash from before hadn't hit the goblin behind the stalactite, instead circling around it before returning like a boomerang. To dodge the light wave slash, Lord Grim had used Shining Cut. However, although he was able to dodge the light wave slash, the waltzing wave slash had looped around, striking him in the back. Lord Grim lost his balance and stumbled forward. Naive, pure. Sure enough, none of those traits had any relation to Jiang Batao. How could a naive and pure person set up such a tricky and crafty trap? Ice wave slash. The third wave of the threefold wave swept towards the stumbling Lord Grim. Jiang Batao had calculated how he would follow up and was about to go through with it when he saw Lord Grim suddenly raise his umbrella. With a whoosh, the umbrella opened. Lord Grim used his shield to block the ice wave slash. Jiang Batao felt a tremble in his heart. He had calculated the distance and timing of these consecutive wave slashes. Even a machine wouldn't have been able to react in time. For Yiziu to do so, he must have been prepared ahead of time. The thought flashed through his mind. The ice wave slash hit the canvas of the myriad manifestations umbrella. The shards of ice seemed to come alive, shooting back towards empty waves. He really was ready for it. This wasn't just a block, but a skill. Shield counter. Shield counter absorbed and reflected damage depending on the level of the skill. Lord Grim's shield counter could only be level 1, so the reflected ice shards was very sparse. However, the speed of the ice shards was no less than before. Jiang Batao had wanted to chain together his attacks, so he positioned empty waves as close as possible to Lord Grim. But that only made it more difficult for him to dodge the reflected ice wave slash now. The reflected damage from a level 1 shield counter was insignificant, but the threat from ice wave slash wasn't the damage, but rather its freeze effect. The freeze effect would be drastically reduced from the shield counter, but it still couldn't be ignored and had to be dodged. Spellblades wore plate armor, so their movements were slow. Dragged down by the heavy weight of his armor, Empty Waves was just barely able to dodge the ice shards, but by this time Lord Grim had closed in. With a bang, Lord Grim's myriad manifestations umbrella struck Empty Waves' armor. Knights also wore plate armor. With their heavy weight, the knockback from a charge could send a spellblade flying. But Lord Grim's charge was much weaker. Against a plate-armored spellblade, all it could do was send the opponent stumbling back a few steps. But this was what Yiziu wanted. He wanted to take the initiative, not send Empty Waves flying away. What do you think? Have you gotten a taste of this senior's fearsomeness? As he typed, Lord Grim rushed forward. His myriad manifestations umbrella transformed into a spear, stabbing towards Empty Waves' head. Jiang Batao didn't have time to reply back to Yiziu's message. Empty Waves held up his weapon, Divine Chains, in an attempt to parry the dragon tooth. Suddenly, the myriad manifestations umbrella transformed. The canvas retracted and the parry missed. All that remained in Jiang Batao's sai was the muzzle of a gun. Boom, boom, boom. 3 anti-tank missiles fired. How could Empty Waves dodge something at point-blank distance? Blast after blast, Empty Waves was swallowed by smoke and light. Flash. A sword was unsheathed. 2 streaks of light followed, creating a cross in the air. Empty Waves was still inside the smoke and light from the explosions. However, he was able to swing his short sword, Divine Chains, downwards from the previous parry position. Ghost Slash. Ghost blades and spell blades primarily dealt magic damage. As a result, when one class used the other class's skills, the skills were quite powerful. This Ghost Slash collided with Lord Grim's Gore Cross. Ghost Slash had a blow-away effect and impressive attack priority. The slash shattered the sword light from Gore Cross, and Lord Grim was forced to jump back to avoid the blow. The Divine Chain swung back up, using a Spellblade skill, Earth Wave Slash. The earth was swept up as it headed towards Lord Grim. By this time, the flames from the explosion had yet to completely disperse. From Jiang Batao's screen, only a fuzzy haze could be seen, but even so, he was able to push out 2 attacks. With a turn, Lord Grim dodged the Earth Wave Slash. The myriad manifestations umbrella swung horizontally while changing forms into a scythe, a priest weapon. Using an exorcist skill hook, it went straight for Empty Waves' throat. Jiang Batao's vision had returned to normal. He rolled on the ground, dodging the attack. He slashed upwards with his sword, counter-attacking with a storm wave slash. The two began fighting back and forth. Lord Grim had too little health. Even though he had been furiously healing himself at the start of the match, he wasn't able to heal too much. No one had expected him to win this fight. It was just a question of how much damage he was able to deal to Jiang Batao. In the end, he was able to take down 24% of Empty Wave's health before falling. Using 4% health in exchange for 24% was a very good result. Happy was happy. They got up and welcomed Yiziu down from the stage. Of course, in reality, their applause was mainly for Yiziu's win in the first round against Joe Zekai. That had been a huge boost to their morale. Yiziu had been in the player booth the entire time, so he didn't know. However, the others remembered how quiet the stadium had been when Joe Zekai lost. Mo Fan was Happy's second player for the group arena. He clapped very mechanically alongside everyone else, waiting for Yiziu to come back before heading onto the stage. "Be careful, that guy's got a very black heart," Yiziu reminded. No one knew if Mo Fan heard him or not, but he was on his way towards the stage now. On the side, Fang Rui booed at Yiziu. "Is there anyone with a blacker heart than yours?" "Of course not. Boss is the best at everything," Steamed Bun replied back for Yiziu. Chapter 1594, Young Growth. Chapter 1594, Young Growth. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. Both sides had sent out their second player in the group arena, but the atmosphere in the stadium seemed to have paused at the first matchup. When Mo Fan walked towards the stage, the crowd members in the away team seats clapped wildly, but because the Samsara fans were still downcast, the overall atmosphere felt rather oppressive. No boos or taunts were thrown towards the opposing side. The atmosphere in the stadium could affect how a player performed, especially more emotional players. For them, the more intense the crowd, the more exhilarating it was. It didn't matter if the cheers were aimed towards them or the other side, the cheers could help ignite their fighting spirit all the same. The atmosphere in Samsara's stadium was abnormal. It was only the second player in the group arena, but because of Joe Zekai's defeat, the crowd seemed to be dispirited and cold. However, this ice-cold atmosphere seemed to be far more comfortable for Mo Fan compared to the past. His footsteps were light and quick as he walked towards the stage. The match soon began, and the two characters loaded in. The map wasn't a random map, so the group arena lineups were predetermined. Jiang Batao knew who his next opponent would be. But while Mo Fan's deception loaded into the map, Jiang Batao was in a similar mood as the crowd. He was still thinking about the previous match and was having trouble readjusting his mindset. B. Oxnovel, C. Ohm, Yiziu's Lord Grim only had 4% of his health remaining from his battle with Joe Zekai. However, with that 4%, he was able to take out 24% of Jiang Batao's empty waves. This was not a good outcome, but if you considered that Yiziu had healed at the start and his true health wasn't really 4%, it wasn't too bad. But he couldn't seem to forget how he had believed that he had seen through Yiziu, but in reality he hadn't, and Yiziu was still able to get off a combo on him. Even though he was able to quickly stabilize his footing again, he had indeed experienced Yiziu's fearsomeness. He hadn't looked down on Yiziu. At the start of the fight, there had been a psychological battle. Jiang Batao's words hadn't been fierce. There was no unadorned ridicule. He had used a rather passive-aggressive method to get at his opponent. This was because he knew that to these experienced old players, that sort of unadorned trash talk wouldn't faze them. On the contrary, the seemingly more careless but sincere remarks were more likely to tilt them. Jiang Batao wasn't the first on Samsara to go up, but before the match had started, he had talked with Yiziu quite a bit. It didn't seem like he was trying to provoke Yiziu. He just seemed to be calmly stating a fact. However, Yiziu exposed his intentions to teach them a lesson. Jiang Batao's calm and collected provocation had clearly succeeded. He had wanted to trigger this sort of mentality from Yiziu. That way, when he faced Joe Zekai, he might play more rashly and become distracted by Jiang Batao's words. Even if he won against Zhou Zekai with this mentality, when he faced Jiang Batao, he might play poorly from being too excited. In short, Jiang Batao's goal was to break his concentration. However, it ignited Yi Ziu's fighting spirit instead. Then, he beat Zhou Zekai and fought against Jiang Batao well enough to display his fearsomeness. Jiang Batao was at a loss. He wasn't sure if his mental attack had worked or not. If the skill gap had been wide, then this sort of mental attack was useless. But Yi Ziu was facing Zhou Zekai. There wasn't a wide skill gap. That was why Jiang Batao was rather inclined to believe that Yi Ziu hadn't been provoked by him in the end. Was the attitude that Yi Ziu displayed just in order to make me overly optimistic? This was the fearsomeness that Jiang Batao experienced. The subtleties in this psychological battle couldn't be completely uncovered in just a few minutes. The psychological battle was no less fierce than the battle on stage. Loading complete. When these words popped up, the scene instantly shifted to his character's view. The countdown finished, and Jiang Batao immediately refocused. Yi Ziu, who? What did he do? No idea. His opponent was Mo Fan. What he needed to do was beat him, that was all. Jiang Batao's attention quickly returned to the match, to the opponent he would be facing next, to Happy's Mo Fan. A quiet, persistent, patient, and explosive player. He played rather unorthodoxly, but what was more astonishing was that after an entire season, these unorthodox traits still remained. Jiang Batao was very curious to how Happy practiced. Had there been any guidance for this rookie? Could they all be self-made geniuses? But Happy didn't only have one rookie, though. The others weren't as unorthodox as him. Unless Happy told him the answer, thinking about it was pointless. Knowing the reason wasn't important anyways. As long as he could see what condition his opponent was in, that was all that was needed. Empty waves began to move, going straight towards the center. At the same time, Jiang Batao typed out in the chat, "Straight to the center, going around, thanks." No response. Jiang Batao wasn't surprised. Up until now, no one had seen Mo Fan say anything during a match, let alone respond to trash talk. Jiang Batao hadn't expected any response from Mo Fan, and reality proved that he was right. Empty waves quickly reached the center of the map. The center of the map had a huge stalactite that connected the ground and ceiling. Before Jiang Batao got close to it, he looked around, and sure enough, Mo Fan's deception had taken a roundabout path. B. Ox novel. See Mo Fan would circle around 9 times out of 10 to set up an ambush, and it looked like this time was no exception. But this was Samsara's map. When choosing a map, the map should be advantageous to your side but disadvantageous to the other side. The map should help the players on your side perform, while restricting the players on the other side. That was how a map should be picked. Mo Fan's playstyle was restricted by this map. Seeing that the other side hadn't gone straight towards the center, Jiang Batao had empty waves find a spot and wait there quietly. There were 3 stalactites in his immediate surroundings. The closest one was still a distance away. If Mo Fan wanted to ambush him from there, he would still be able to react in time. By positioning himself here, he seemed to have shut down Mo Fan's preferred methods. "Would you like my coordinates?" Jiang Batao had finished finding a spot. He continued to check his surroundings and tried to communicate with Mo Fan. Mo Fan spoke more in the game than in real life, but when playing in a match, he didn't like to talk with his opponent, especially if it was to respond to this sort of useless chatter. "I don't need your coordinates because I already see you." Deception was hidden behind one of the 3 stalactites close to empty waves. It wasn't easy to ambush him at this distance, so Mo Fan patiently waited. But Jiang Ba didn't move. In these circumstances, if Jiang Batao didn't move and he didn't move, he would be the one penalized. Mo Fan had made this mistake before and he still remembered it clearly. He checked the time and made sure that the other side wasn't going to move. Mo Fan was helpless. He could only act. Deception peeked out his head from behind the stalactite. Jiang Batao had been checking his surroundings the entire time. Suddenly, he noticed a flash of cold light from one of the stalactites. Deception had thrown a shuriken towards him. Empty waves dodged it and then quickly moved forward, swinging his divine chains. Jiang Batao didn't think a simple swing of his weapon would hit Deception, who only had a small part of his body exposed. As a result, when he swung his divine chains, he used waltzing wave slash to curve his attack. Deception pulled back and then took out his ninjato. He stabbed it into the stalactite and then leapt onto it. Jiang Batao couldn't see what Deception was doing, but he also wasn't charging in. After all, spellblades were a mid-range class. Empty waves moved laterally to expand his vision. At this distance, empty waves could see Deception above. Mo Fan's attempt at a sneak attack was like child's play. Mo Fan had completely overlooked the characteristics of his opponent's class, but no one had expected Deceptions to move along with empty waves. Empty waves moved to the side to widen his vision, while Deception also circled around to keep himself hidden. He had predicted what Jiang Batao would do. At Happy's player bench, Yi Ziu, Suma Cheng, and the others gave off smiles of gratitude. Mo Fan was becoming more and more like a pro player. For example, predicting what the opponent would do based off of the opponent's strengths. He had been trained in an unorthodox way. His playstyle was unique to him, but his thoughts, his intuition, and his approach towards the game was becoming more and more like a pro player's. He was playing the game like it was a competitive match rather than like his former scrap-picking days. With this change in perspective, he was gradually forming his own way to better utilize his strengths to win. The more time went on, the less Yiziu worried about Mo Fan's future. Mo Fan might not like talking to others, but that didn't mean he refused to change. He had his own way of doing things. It might be slower than if he listened directly to his advice, but what he found in the end would definitely be the most suitable and the best for him. It's good to be young, Wei Chen suddenly sighed. He had also seen Mo Fan's quiet growth and hated how he wouldn't have the same opportunity as him ever again. If not, no matter how difficult it was, he would certainly try his hardest to break through and improve. Growth was the domain of the young. Chapter 1595, Calm Terror. Chapter 1595, Calm Terror. Translator, Namyami. Editor, Namyami. Waltzing wave slash mist. There was not a soul in sight. The others on Happy were gratified seeing Mo Fan's red on Jiang Batao, but this alone wouldn't be enough to baffle him. Mo Fan had learned to make decisions according to the opponent's class. How could an even more experienced player like Jiang Batao not be able to either? Deception was a ninja. Ninjas could use their ninjato to climb up walls, and no pro player would ever overlook this ability when playing against a ninja. Because empty waves was a certain distance away from the stalactite, he could see the majority of it. When he moved to the side to take a look from a different angle, he also moved forward, which allowed him to see the entire height of the stalactite. But there was nothing below or above. Jiang Batao reacted at lightning speed. Empty waves immediately went back to his previous position. Deception was instantly exposed. Empty waves slashed upwards, sending a light wave slash towards him. The slash came out at the speed of light, tearing through Deception. Poof! It's a shadow clone technique, Pan Lin shouted as if he were crying out in surprise in place of Jiang Batao. In reality, with their omniscient view over the battle, they had already known this would happen. As Mo Fan's Deception circled around to prevent empty waves from seeing him, he also used a shadow clone technique. The shadow clone remained hanging on the stalactite, while the real body dropped to the ground and then disappeared. Underground tunneling technique. Deception had used underground tunneling technique to hide and then strike at the right opportunity. Hua. Deception drilled out of the ground, earth still crumbling away from him, as he aimed straight for Empty Wave's throat. But by this time, empty waves had retracted his divine chains. Guard. Ding. Their weapons collided. Empty waves used the impact to slide backwards. He was even able to react to such a sudden underground tunneling technique. Earthquake sword. Empty waves threw out an earth wave slash. It was too close, too fast, and this time Mo Fan wasn't able to react in time. Deception was hit by the attack. It wasn't that Jiang Batao's reaction speed had been godly, but rather that he had been ready. He had seen through Mo Fan's plans. The light wave slash had simply been a bait. After earth, fire, and ice, two successive wave slashes one after the other. However, when the ice crystals swept over, all that was frozen was a straw dummy. Substitution technique. Mo Fan had used a ninja skill to escape this combo. This was why the threefold wave was always light, fire, ice in that order. Otherwise, the combo could be broken. Earth wave slash didn't have the same speed as light wave slash. As a result, there was an opening between the following fire and ice wave slashes, which Mo Fan seized, using a substitution technique to escape. Substitution technique teleported the user to a random location, so Mo Fan didn't know where he would end up at himself. It would naturally be even more difficult for the opponent to follow since there was no logic behind it. Mo Fan had taken advantage of this randomness multiple times in the group arena against Tyranny. He gambled again, and in the end he was able to beat Tyranny's Chin Mayan. That fight had left a deep impression on many people, and now that Mo Fan had used substitution technique again, their first thought was that it wasn't to escape but rather to attack. Jiang Batao also realized this point. Empty waves didn't just stand there stupidly. He looked all around him, swinging his sword in a circle. Magic burst from his blade, covering all of empty waves. Nebula Wave Slash, the level 75 Spellblade skill. When used, the magic would be shaped randomly. But the magic could also be controlled by the user. One way was to have it spread around 360 degrees. This skill was extremely flexible, allowing the user to use it in surprising ways. After this skill came out, it became hugely popular among Spellblade players. Spellblades mainly added points into their wave slashes or wave formations. However, the Nebula Wave Slash was so fun and useful that even players who specialized in wave formations would spend their skill points to learn and level it. Pro players obviously wouldn't learn it just because it was fun. Jiang Batao's empty waves specialized in wave slashes. As a result, he had spent a lot of effort coming up with ways to use this skill. Mo Fan really had used the substitution technique to attack. He didn't want to repeat the same strategy as before, but he simply realized the fact that the substitution technique's random teleport could catch the opponent off guard. He was just taking advantage of it right now. He threw a storm shuriken towards empty waves and rushed forward to close in. But then, he saw empty waves turn in a circle, creating a protective barrier around him with a nebula wave slash. Shua. The fast and powerful storm shuriken was blocked by the nebula wave slash and deflected to the side. The priority of nebula wave slash wasn't low, having properties of both offense and defense. For a moment, Mo Fan wasn't able to find any openings. When Jiang Batao turned and used Nebula Wave Slash, he had located deception. The Nebula Wave Slash appeared to be a complete circle, but after Jiang Batao found deception, he immediately made some slight adjustments. In the end, the Nebular Wave Slash formed a large crescent moon. His shortsword, Divine Chains, swung towards deception. Instead of spreading outwards, the magic swept towards that direction. The Aya covered at least 5 or 6 body lengths. The magic wave was neither concentrated nor dispersed. It was like a wall that was pushing towards deception. Dodge, dodge where? Up, down, left, right. In the end, Jiang Batao was able to turn the Nebula Wave Slash into a gigantic Aya attack. Deception's escape routes had been sealed, and his escape tools, Shadow clone technique and substitution technique were on cooldown, but Mo Fan didn't just sit there doing nothing. Deception immediately retreated backwards. The nebula wave slash was shaped like a crescent moon, which meant that there was more room to escape from the sides. Deception wanted to take advantage of this point. But as the nebula wave slash expanded, it quickly patched up these openings on the side. The magic was densely weaved together with no openings. This time, Mo Fan was helpless. The retreating deception was swallowed by the nebula wave slash. Everyone looked towards deception's health, but they discovered that the powerful nebula wave slash didn't deal as much damage as everyone had expected. This level 75 skill had a very high base damage, but because of how spread out it was, the damage was reduced considerably. Loud thunder, but only small drops of rain. That was the feeling this attack gave off. Some people felt disappointed. Some people saw this attack as nothing more than the start of a combo. Empty waves got up and gave chase, sending out wave slash after wave slash, magic slash after magic slash, striking deception. The combo meter soared as deception's health plummeted. There was unexpectedly nothing Mo Fan could do. Empty waves didn't only include the unbreakable threefold wave, but also many other wave slash skill. Even so, Mo Fan wasn't able to find an opening to escape. Escaping was what Mo Fan was best at. In terms of escaping, Mo Fan was #1 even in the pro scene. But right now, his deception had unexpectedly been completely locked into place by empty waves. By empty waves, a spellblade. This was worthy of astonishment. Although spellblades were swordsmen, they were considered a mid-ranged magic class. There were two ways to play spellblades. The first was to specialize in wave formations, larger AOs and strong CC. The other way was to specialize in wave slashes, stronger DPS but weaker CC. Their mid-range meant that they didn't have the same oppressiveness as close-ranged classes. However, Jiang Batao's empty waves had linked together his wave slashes so tightly that not even a master at escaping like Mo Fan was able to get away. How is he doing it? Those familiar with spellblades were in awe. They couldn't see the reason. They could only be in awe at Jiang Batao's skill. No wonder he was the #1 spellblade. He could do what others couldn't. As for the pro players, they quickly discovered the secret. Prediction and positioning. Whenever Jiang Batao's empty waves used a wave slash, he would never be in the same spot. He was fully putting to use the characteristics of every wave slash, searching for the most suitable position to send his attack where he wanted it to go, striking deception and continuing the combo. Every attack was a read. This was because Mo Fan wasn't just doing nothing. He was trying to find an opening, and every struggle from deception was read perfectly by Jiang Batao. No, he isn't just reading him, Yiziu said. He's constantly putting out bait. Every attack he makes leaves what seems like an opening, but this opening will quickly be patched up by his next attack. Mo Fan is too sharp. His reactions are too fast. The moment he sees the opening, he immediately goes for it. However, by then, Jiang Batao has already patched it with another attack, which then leaves another opening. It's a strategy that works against Mo Fan specifically. He's taking advantage of Mo Fan's strengths rather than his weaknesses. That guy's quite terrifying, Yiziu said. It never feels like he's that great of a player, though, Chen Guo said. Because he's too calm, Yiziu said. Chapter 1596. Vice Captain Song. Chapter 1596. Vice Captain Song. Translator. Namyumi Editor. Namyumi. In recent years, Jiang Batao's placings in the all-star rankings were quite high. Everyone felt like he was an amazing player, but whenever people were asked to say what specifically was amazing about him, 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't be able to answer back. They had that feeling in their heart, but they didn't know how to describe it in words. Even Team Samsara themselves couldn't seem to find the right words to describe their vice-captain. In the end, his fame seemed to simply be because he was the vice-captain of a championship team. And now Yi Ziu had given him high praise, terrifying, a calm terror. Chen Guo couldn't immediately understand what Yi Ziu meant by that. She really wanted to drag Yi Ziu over and explain it more clearly, but right now, Mo Fan's situation was more concerning. A calm terror. It wasn't important that she understood it. What was more important was whether Mo Fan could. A 27-hit combo. This was the number on the combo counter. It was extremely eye-catching. Even a close-ranged class would have difficulty pulling off this long of a combo. Spellblades had it somewhat easier to get a high-hit combo since their wave swords counted for several hits, but a 27-hit combo in one breath wasn't easy at all. Spellblades were swordsmen, but unlike blade masters and berserkers, their strikes didn't feel like strikes. For those classes, combos were an important metric to measure a player's skill. On the other hand, spellblades were more similar to mage classes like elementalists and witches. Although they could also combo, no one measured an elementalist's skill based off how long their combos were. It would almost be forcing the elementalist into doing something they shouldn't be doing. As a result, if these types of mage classes ever put out long combos, it was mainly a sign that they were crushing a noob. However, this was the Glory Championship Finals, a battle between the very best players. No matter how new or how much of an underdog Happy was to reach this step, it was impossible for them to be noobs. There were no noobs in the finals. Mo Fan may be a rookie, but he was undoubtedly a troublesome opponent. Even so, Jiang Bata was able to get his Spellblade to perform such a long combo against this sort of opponent on the final stage. This obviously wasn't him crushing a noob. It was an unprecedented display of brilliance. When the combo reached 30, the crowd went wild. After Zhou Zekai lost to Yi Ziu, Samsara's fans seemed to be unable to accept it and became dispirited. But starting from that Nebula Wave sword, their spirits reignited. With each hit, their spirits rose to new heights. When the combo counter hit 30, a Spellblade performing a 30-hit combo, their blood was boiling. Cheers, applause, the entire stadium was filled with shouts of Jiang Batao's name. The silence had finally been broken, and the one who did it was Jiang Batao, Samsara's vice-captain. The crowd suddenly started to sing. No one knew who started it, but the person wasn't able to get the whole crowd going. It didn't seem like many people knew the song. Even the fans singing it weren't in unison. It was a mess of noise, and the song lyrics were unclear. Their unfamiliarity with the song leaked in every way it could. Even so, they continued to sing and sing. Suddenly, a powerful and united chant began to reverberate in everyone's ears as if the entire song had been a build-up for this chorus. When you're in joy, that's when he strikes. When you're in joy, that's when he strikes. Those who couldn't sing, those who didn't know the lyrics when this phrase came, the entire stadium seemed to echo with this chant again and again. This was the song of Samsara's vice-captain. Even the fans weren't familiar with it. When they sang it, not many fans knew it. In fact, very few fans knew it. This was because their team had Zhou Zekai, and all the flashy stuff was done by him. Numerous songs had been composed for Zhou Zekai, but the fans hadn't forgotten about their vice-captain. Even though he wasn't a flashy player, just like their song said, when the opponent's feeling happy, their vice-captain strikes. They would always remember this point clearly. Like today, their Zhou Zekai had unexpectedly lost. The fans didn't care what exactly their opponents were feeling, but in any case, they believed that their opponents would definitely be in glee seeing Zhou Zekai's defeat. The crowd had become depressed as a result. But at this moment, their vice-captain stood up, executing a rarely seen high-hit combo from a Spellblade, awakening the crowd and burning down their opponent's delight. Their vice-captain didn't disappoint them. They had been so downtrodden that they had forgotten to put their hopes onto him, yet he still stood up and gave them the support they needed. It was because he was always so reliable in these crucial moments that Jiang Batao became so popular. Placing high on the all-star rankings wasn't that easy. It showed that he truly had support from a huge number of fans. "You can do it. You have to win. We are the champions." The chant ended and the cheering began again. Samsara's home crowd had recovered and the happy fans in the away team seats were once again surrounded in enemy territory. Mo Fan wouldn't know about any of this. Even if he knew, he probably wouldn't have any reaction. He definitely wasn't the you in the song. He hadn't been in joy. 30 hits. Mo Fan hadn't been able to escape. He had tried to search for openings, but his opponent would always patch those immediately. Mo Fan could faintly feel something. But even though a 30-hit combo sounded long, in reality, it was only a matter of seconds. He didn't have time to think carefully about what that feeling was. Suddenly, the attack stopped. Spellblade skills were strong but also had relatively long cooldowns. After this combo, an opening soon appeared because he didn't have any suitable skills to continue it. Dodge. Charge. These two thoughts flashed through Mo Fan's mind. Charge. Empty Waves was in front of him, 4.5 steps away. For a ninja, this distance was negligible. Running and then re-establishing an offense might not get him this sort of opportunity. Deception rushed out, forming hand seals. Ninjutsu, ground shrinking technique. 4.5 steps became 2 steps. Deception had closed in onto Empty Waves. However, all he saw was the cold light from Empty Waves' divine chains. It wasn't magic, but a sharp sword light. Moonlight slash. With a flash of light, Deception was launched into the air. Naturally, the second part of the dual moon slash followed, full moonlight slash. Full moonlight slash's blow-away effect pushed Deception away, giving Empty Waves space to swing his sword again. Wave Wheel Slasher. The waves of magic locked Deception into place. That 4.5 steps of distance hadn't been an opportunity, it had been bait. His setup hadn't worked on Yiziu, but he didn't lose confidence in himself. Facing Mo Fan, he calmly made these arrangements. His utilization of Mo Fan's strengths and weaknesses became the core of his setup. Mo Fan seemed to have stepped into a quagmire. The more he moved, the deeper he fell. Earth Wave Sword. Empty Wave slashed again with his sword, sending an Earth Wave Sword at Deception. Peng! Purple smoke suddenly spread out, engulfing Deception and the Earth Wave Sword. Ninjutsu Smoke Bomb. Jiang Batao reacted quickly. His Earth Wave Sword had missed. He couldn't see where Mo Fan was, and he didn't know whether Mo Fan would run or attack him. As a result, he had Empty Waves retreat. First, open up some distance between them. Then he saw a figure dart out from the purple smoke from where the Earth Wave Sword had swept towards. Shadow Clone Technique. Deception had been in the air when he threw out the Earth Wave Sword. To dodge the attack, he could have only used a skill. Ghost Slash. Jiang Batao had been ready. He swung his divine chains, using a Ghost Slash straight towards Deception, sending him flying. But then 1, 2, 3, Deception after Deception rushed out from the purple smoke, while the sword light from his Ghost Slash was still moving. It wasn't Shadow Clone Technique. It was Shadow Dance. Jiang Batao couldn't help but be surprised. He knew that there was an opening before the Earth Wave Sword would arrive when Wave Wheel Slasher ended. If Mo Fan took advantage of the opening well enough, he could dodge it. But Mo Fan had actually been able to use Shadow Dance during this tiny opening. Ninja hand seals could be considered as a cast time. It was just that the cast time depended on the player's hand speed. Using Shadow Dance with such a tiny opening was truly brave, yet to actually succeed showed how frightening his hand speed was. What was more amazing was that Shadow Dance succeeded, but he didn't hurry to attack. He first sent out a bait to lure him into attacking. Then, while he was still in the attack's ending lag, he attacked. Wasn't this what he had just been doing to Mo Fan? This punk, a tooth for a tooth so fast. For a moment, Empty Waves was surrounded by shadow clones. For a Spellblade, it wasn't easy to deal with attacks from all sides. Empty Waves swung his sword, using normal attacks to parry and block what attacks he could. An opening. He raised his sword, waltzing Wave Sword. This waltzing wave sword's arc was extremely large. As soon as it came out, it started to curve, dispersing the deception shadow clone to his side. It didn't stop there, continuing its arc towards the next one. Jiang Batao's waltzing wave sword was used adeptly. He had it go around him. After it hit a target, its power would decrease, but it would keep going, hitting target after target. In an instant, the waltzing wave sword went in a large arc, destroying 3 of Deception's shadow clones. A huge hole was created in the encirclement. Empty Wave swung his sword again, a fire wave sword opening a path as he rushed out. But Mo Fan refused to let him go. He canceled his shadow dance and intercepted Empty Wave's ninjutsu exploding flame dragon. Boom! 2 balls of fire erupted. The fire wave sword's burst was extremely strong, sending Deception flying far away. But at the same time, Empty Waves was also hit full force by Deception's attack. Exploding flame dragon. A level 75 ninja skill. Even when matched against the Spellblade's most powerful wave slash, its damage wouldn't lose out. Chapter 1597, A Good But Unsustainable Game. Chapter 1597, A Good But Unsustainable Game. Translator. Namyumi Editor. Namyumi Mo Fan suddenly went aggressive. To outsiders, it seemed to simply be a different choice due to the circumstances, a change in tempo. But to Happy, it was another breakthrough for Mo Fan. Mo Fan had grown as a scrap picker. His instinct was to prioritize his survival, now and in the past. His entire play style revolved around survival. In his previous matches, there were times when he rushed his opponent, but this sort of blow-for-blow combat was mostly out of helplessness. However, his decision to trade Exploding Flame Dragon for Fire Wave Slash was a proactive choice. This was a step forward towards his future. Turn around and go again. The moment Deception touched the ground, he immediately turned around to attack again. He threw a shuriken to open up a path and quickly formed hand seals. Ninjutsu, hundreds of streams of water rushed towards Jiang Batao's Empty Waves, but the distance was a bit far. Empty Waves was able to dodge it with ease. However, in that time, Deception turned into a blur and suddenly appeared in front of him. Ninjutsu, Flickering Pursuit. Ninjutsu, Bird Fall. Annihilation. Attack, attack, attack. Mo Fan suddenly became extremely aggressive. It was as if he had become a different person. Even if it could be considered a breakthrough, it felt rather exaggerated. Undaunted by dangers, he attacked furiously. At this point, even his teammates on Happy felt surprised at Mo Fan's sudden shift in mentality, let alone Jiang Batao. Deception weaved forward, backwards, to the side, from above, from below, all around Empty Waves, searching everywhere he could for an opening to attack. Empty Waves seemed to be at a loss. Jiang Batao was clearly caught off guard. Samsara had obviously studied their opponents in the finals, and standout players like Mo Fan, who had clear and defined playstyles, were relatively easier to grasp. In the first game in the finals, Mo Fan hadn't given them much trouble. It had only been 3 days since then, yet it was almost like he was a different person. They had never seen him play this way in the finals, in the semi-finals, in the regular season. It just had to be now. Nice, beautiful, Chen Guo cheered. Yeah, good job, Yiziu nodded his head. What he saw wasn't just Mo Fan doing what he had never done before. What he saw was Mo Fan's purpose and goal. For someone like him who prioritized survival, why would he suddenly charge and aggressively all of a sudden? Because he noticed that Jiang Batao's Empty Waves currently had no skills available to use. Spellblade skills were powerful, but their cooldowns were long. Not caring about combos was hard for normal players, but for pro players, it was worse for a Spellblade to overuse their skills to continue a combo. To produce a combo, attacks needed to be chained together fast enough. However, for Spellblades, if they tried to chain their skills together that fast, their cooldowns wouldn't be able to keep up, and soon, they would have no skills left to use. To guarantee that there were always skills that could be used, Classes like Spellblades could not pursue these types of long and flashy combos. Jiang Batao had performed this type of combo in this match, though. The spectators had been in awe watching it, even singing their vice-captain's song. However, the pro players knew what this 30-hit Spellblade combo would entail. Mo Fan had caught on, choosing to rush down Jiang Batao, doing what he didn't like to do. Jiang Batao hadn't expected this to happen. He had performed that combo in order to stir the crowd. How could he not know that their fans were downcast after Zhou Zekai's defeat? If he could take out Yiziu beautifully, he could boost their morale. Unfortunately, he failed. Instead, Yiziu's Lord Grimm used his 4% to take out his 24%. The crowd's morale sunk even lower. As a result, when he fought against Mo Fan, he did a risky Spellblade combo. The reason that he took this risk was because he reckoned that Mo Fan wouldn't seize the opening that came afterwards. That player would always play his own way, refusing to interact with his opponent, regardless if it was for better or for worse. But he was wrong. Not only did Mo Fan take advantage of the opening, he was very decisive, staking everything on it. Mo Fan still hadn't opened up to interacting with his teammates, but he had opened a new page on the stage. Mo Fan went all out, showing a fighting strength that he had never shown before. Jiang Batao did his best to defend. He's playing beautifully. Yiziu agreed with Chen Guo, but beautiful wasn't enough. Mo Fan had taken advantage of the opening, but he wasn't able to fully utilize it. He knew that Jiang Batao didn't have many skills he could use, but he also couldn't finish the battle here. Jiang Batao just needed to defend himself until his skills came back off cooldown. But did Mo Fan have a way to fight his opponent once those skills came off cooldown? Could take it another step and adjust his mentality to hold on to his current advantage? It looked like he didn't. In the end, he lacked experience. Mo Fan was able to seize this opportunity, but he wasn't able to fully take advantage of it. He could burst, but he didn't have the control to maintain a drawn-out offense. To do the latter, he needed to have a deeper understanding of his opponent and his opponent's class. Happy had, of course, analyzed Jiang Batao. At this point, Mo Fan had a good understanding of every class in Glory, but for right now it wasn't enough. He had created an advantageous situation for himself, but he didn't have the experience to maintain it. It was unfortunate, but it showed hope for the future. He lost. In the end, Mo Fan lost. Jiang Batao had only been caught off guard for an instant. He quickly regained his footing. Even though he hadn't been able to retaliate much, he was able to stabilize the situation. Then, once his skills came off cooldown, he started his counterattack. In the end, he was able to gain back the upper hand and beat Mo Fan. However, Empty Waves only had 11% of his health left. This outcome was far worse than Jiang Batao had expected. He had thought he had complete control over the battle, but he had been caught off guard by Mo Fan's sudden outburst. The lead that he had was reduced to just 11%. It hadn't been easy for him to reinvigorate the crowd, but unfortunately, most of his efforts had been ruined by Mo Fan's counterattack. Luckily, he was still able to win in the end. The Samsara fans didn't feel that their singing had been for nothing. Their vice-captain didn't let them down, so their mood was much better than before. Mo Fan left the stage amidst congratulatory applause. Usually, his non-interactive playstyle was frequently met with boos in away team stadiums. Today, he had shown a surprising amount of aggression. For a moment, Samsara's fans couldn't find anything to pick at. Instead of booing, they applauded his performance. Mo Fan never cared, though. He quietly walked back to his team. "Nice job," everyone on Happy exclaimed. Mo Fan looked at the stage and at the screen. 11%. It was a small difference. Just a bit more and he could have won. No matter how well you played, what was the point if you lost? Mo Fan wasn't happy with the result. As he walked back to his seat, he clenched his fists tightly, staring intently at Jiang Batao's 11% health Empty Waves. "Keep up the good work." There will be more chances in the future. Suma Cheng waved her hands towards Mo Fan and said. Mo Fan stared blankly at her. Before he could nod his head, Suma Cheng turned around and headed towards the stage. She was Happy's next player. The Samsara crowd had returned to their usual state, cheering excitedly for their team. Even though Empty Waves only had 11% health left, they had hopes for Jiang Batao. The fans at the away team seats cheered for their team, but the shouts from Samsara's fans drowned them out. Suma Cheng wasn't as expressionless as Mo Fan. She wore a smile on her face as she walked onto the stage. Suma Cheng was Happy's third player in the group arena. She would be playing against Jiang Batao. The match began. Dripstone Cave. For sharpshooters, it provided them space and cover. Suma Cheng's dancing rain was a gunner as well, and she could take advantage of the space as well. Because she was longer ranged, it wasn't as good for her as it was for a sharpshooter, but in general, the map was favorable for Suma Cheng. There was no way to choose a perfect map that would make it difficult for every opponent. After all, there would be class overlap between teams. Both teams could have players with similar play styles as well. When it was advantageous for one team, it could also be advantageous for the other team. When choosing a map, you could only do your best. In today's match, Suma Cheng was Happy's winner. When the battle began, she immediately headed for the center of the cave. Samsara's Jiang Batao took his time though, seeing what the circumstances were. With only 11% of his health remaining, he decided not to go straight for the center, instead choosing to circle around from the left. Suma Cheng gradually approached the center of the map. She naturally didn't see any traces of him. She didn't continue forward, instead stopping immediately. She didn't lean to the left or right. She centered herself at the center and lifted her hand cannon. She looked ahead to the left and to the right. For other classes, the purpose of having a wide field of view was to find the opponent earlier. However, for launchers, their attacks could be launched from afar. It didn't matter what route Empty Waves took. It seemed like he wouldn't be able to escape from Dancing Rain's artillery fire. The broadcast cut the screen into two. One part showed Dancing Rain's point of view, while the other showed Empty Waves. The dripstone was sparsely scattered throughout the cave. Trying to move completely hidden was impossible, and it didn't look like Empty Waves was trying to hide himself. He simply went along a straight line. What was the point of circling around then? Many members of the crowd couldn't help but ask. Chapter 1598, Still One Eye. Chapter 1598. Still One Eye. Translator. Namiyami Editor. Namiyami. The commentators analyzed Empty Waves' movements from different angles. Once Yizu had left the stage, Pan Lin and Li Yibo felt a huge weight off their chests. Their discussions became more colorful and vivid. As the distance between the two players grew nearer, the small screen showing Suma Cheng's perspective grew larger. Where was Empty Waves moving to? The viewers knew, but would Suma Cheng be able to tell? What was the secret behind Jiang Batao's movements? Everyone was trying to figure it out. Empty Waves rushed out from a stalagmite and appeared in Suma Cheng's view. Secret, the discussion between Pan Lin and Li Yibo stopped. The two had been chatting, thinking up all sorts of possibilities. The one possibility that they hadn't talked about was that there was no ulterior motive behind Jiang Batao's movements. How could they say that? The two had the same thought. If they said north when it was actually south, how could they show their faces? Yizu was an exception. Facing Yizu, they would try not to make any predictions, but they couldn't do that with everyone. There wouldn't be any commentary then. Hurry up and talk. The two characters had encountered each other, but the commentary had suddenly stopped. The director wasn't happy at all and yelled at them. Talk, fuck off. Pan Lin cursed inwardly, but he had to talk. What a surprise, Jiang Batao just let Empty Waves appear in Suma Cheng's view, Pan Lin said powerlessly. The ones most surprised were him and Li Yibo. All of their previous analysis had been wrong. What is he thinking? Even Li Yibo didn't pretend like he knew and simply stated the truth. We can only wait and see, Pan Lin remarked, and then the two went silent again. As soon as Empty Waves appeared, Dancing Rain aimed her cannon at him but didn't immediately fire at him. Dancing Rain had the range to attack him. However, the farther away the target, the more time there was for the target to dodge. It was hard to guarantee that she would hit him. Suma Cheng didn't feel like her attacks would be much of a threat at this distance. She was better off just doing nothing. Empty Waves didn't rush towards her either. He continued to circle around as if it was just another day in the park. He had already been exposed. What was the point of circling around? Suma Cheng turned, following his movements. Soon, everyone noticed a peculiarity. Whether it was close-by or far away, the dripstones were arranged neatly along a jagged line. Empty Waves took cover behind these dripstones. The logic behind this positioning was the same as when Yiziu evaded Zhou Zekai in the first fight of the group arena. Sure enough, Samsara had also discovered this method. Suma Cheng immediately had Dancing Rain rush out, changing her angle to find Empty Waves. None. Empty Waves was nowhere to be seen. Which stalagmite was he hiding behind? Suma Cheng wasn't sure. The spectators could see his location clearly. When Empty Waves escaped from Suma Cheng's line of sight, he immediately began to move inwards to get closer to Dancing Rain. He was aiming for 3 stalagmites, each one taller than the other. It would allow him to close in without being seen. If she moved just a bit more to the side, she would find him. The happy fans were praying anxiously. Suma Cheng's Dancing Rain was just one step off step. Dancing Rain finally took that awaited step, widening her vision. However, Empty Waves had already moved from the shortest stalagmite to the next shortest one, and was now onto the tallest one. With this switch, Suma Cheng's line of sight was blocked by a stalagmite. Jiang Batao was predicting her movements and acting accordingly. Everyone could see this. Jiang Batao hadn't taken advantage of the map too much in his previous 2 fights. As a result, everyone had overlooked the fact that Samsara had chosen this map. This time, he utilized the map to the fullest, efficiently closing the distance between Empty Waves and Dancing Rain. The distance between the tallest stalagmite and Dancing Rain was completely within the attack range of a Spellblade. Spellblades wouldn't fear launchers in a confrontation at this distance. He reached it. Thunderous applause followed. Jiang Batao reached his goal just as they had expected. As for Suma Cheng's Dancing Rain, it seemed like she was still carefully investigating Empty Waves' whereabouts. He can attack, everyone thought. Then they saw Suma Cheng's camera suddenly turn around. Dancing Rain stepped to the sides and opened fired. Boom, boom, boom. The first to attack was unexpectedly Dancing Rain. 3 anti-tank missiles fired. With a bang, a stinger burst apart like fireworks in the air. Then a roll. Boom, boom, boom. 3 consecutive explosions. Empty Waves swung his sword, intercepting the 3 anti-tank missiles with a fire wave sword. This was the reason why Spellblades didn't fear launchers at this distance. Their wave swords had a higher priority than launcher artillery shells. A collision between their magic and the launcher's artillery shells would result in an explosion, and their magic would still continue along its original trajectory. The fire wave sword continued to sweep towards Dancing Rain, who rolled away to just barely dodge it. Bang! The stinger split apart in the air. 8 missiles rained down. Spellblades could use their wave swords to intercept these missiles, but these missiles were spread out like an angel scattering flowers. It wasn't possible to intercept them all with one swing. As a result, Empty Waves dodged to the side. Dancing Rain got up from her roll and then set up a mounted gun. Light filled Jiang Batao's screen. A laser beam shot towards him. The two were fighting at mid-range. The laser beam moved faster than anyone could react. Jiang Batao had expected there to be a follow-up to the stinger and was planning on continuing to dodge, but the mounted gun had strengthened laser beam. Even though he predicted correctly, he wasn't able to dodge it. With so little health, why bother making it so complicated? Suma Cheng typed out. The 11% health was instantly obliterated under her launcher's heavy firepower. The crowd was dumbfounded. Jiang Batao had circled around and avoided being seen by Suma Cheng. Empty waves successfully got into range. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. But how did it become Suma Cheng making the first move? It had only been an instant and Empty Waves was dead. The viewers couldn't understand. Too many people couldn't understand. Jiang Batao himself didn't understand either. Had he exposed an opening? No, after casually walking out into view, Jiang Batao had seen Dancing Rain's position. The route that he had chosen to follow afterwards would allow him to hide from Dancing Rain no matter what she did. Yet Suma Cheng had been the first to draw first blood, putting him on the back foot. His movements had been completely seen through. How did she do it? Instinct? Or did she guess it? Happy hadn't chosen this map, so how could they have such a strong understanding of the map? He truly didn't understand why he had lost. Jiang Batao tried to struggle. But with only 11% health, it wasn't enough. Being able to survive for so long was thanks to his class being a Speblade. Plate armor offered high defense. He fell, Empty Waves died. His ghost floated up and his screen turned gray. Jiang Batao stared blankly at the surrounding battlefield as his ghost floated higher and higher. Suddenly, Jiang Batao saw something floating above that stalagmite. It seemed to be some sort of spinning round object. That's electronic eye. Jiang Batao was speechless. He hadn't thought that Dancing Rain would bring along this skill. Electronic eye was a mechanic skill. The user could see whatever the eye saw. This was the skill that Suma Cheng had placed on her weapon. Everything was answered. He had carefully observed Dancing Rain, calculated a route, and made predictions. It turned out that a simple electronic eye had ruined all of his plans. Dancing Rain might not be able to see him, but the electronic eye could. The broadcast had finally found the reason as well. A replay was performed from the electronic eye's perspective. It wasn't as clear as a character's point of view, but it was clear enough to see Empty Waves' movements. Suma Cheng had grasped Jiang Batao's intentions very early on, but she calmly went along with it. She waited until the final moment to get the first attack off before Jiang Batao, cleanly sweeping away the rest of his health. Jiang Batao walked down from the stage. The Samsara fans had been hoping that Jiang Batao would be able to deal a lot of damage to Suma Cheng like what Yiziu had done to him, but instead, Suma Cheng finished him off cleanly. It was rather disappointing, but when they thought of Jiang Batao's brilliant performance in the previous fight, their moods instantly lifted. Both sides were now at their third player. Suma Cheng had won with 100% of her health intact. The match was completely even. However, the Samsara fans had complete confidence in their next players. Lu Boyuan, an all-star, the #1 grappler in glory, got up and walked towards the stage. Applause was sent towards Jiang Batao. Applause was also sent towards Lu Boyuan. "We are the champions!" Samsara's fans roared. Chapter 1599, Extremely Far versus Extremely Close. Chapter 1599, Extremely Far versus Extremely Close. Translator, Namyami Editor. Namyami. Lu Boyuan had once given an amazing performance in the Season 8 finals between Samsara and Blue Rain. He had been a huge reason for Samsara's first championship trophy. After that year's finals, Lu Boyuan's fame soared. In the All-Star voting the next year, he placed 13th, replacing the previous All-Star grappler player Li Yihui, a former Tiny Herb and current Team 301 player. From then on, Lu Boyuan stood at the peak of his class. As for Li Yihui, he had once been an All-Star as well, but because of the transfer, he quickly disappeared from everyone's sights. The title of #1 grappler became uncontested. This season, Lu Boyuan had successfully entered the All-Stars again. Although it wasn't high, only 22nd, Anyone who made it into All-Stars was one of Glory's most popular players. Moreover, Samsara had invited another top player, Sun Xiang, into the team, along with a legendary character like One Autumn Leaf to accompany him. As a result, there was a lot of competition within Samsara's fan base for who got the votes. Lu Boyuan squeezing into the ranks of the 24 All-Stars wasn't easy. If he was less skilled or less popular, the other stars on Samsara might have taken away the spotlight from him. Zhou Zekai, Sun Xiang, Jiang Batao. These three Samsara players placed above 10th on the All-Star rankings. Their fourth All-Star, the 22nd Lu Boyuan, was put as Samsara's third player in the group arena. The crowd cheered and clapped, showing how popular he was. The players on Samsara were making their existence known one after the other to let everyone understand that they weren't just a one-man team. The match began amidst the applause. Because of Su Ma-Cheng's perfect victory in the last fight, both sides were at full health. Dancing Rain had used up a bit of mana, but it was more than enough to last another 1v1 fight. There was practically no difference in their conditions going into the fight. On the other hand, their classes were as different as they could be. This main difference was their range. Launchers had the longest range out of any class. As for grapplers, even among the fighter classes, grapplers had 2-3 the attack range of strikers who specialized in close combat. Not only did they need to land a hit on their opponent, they needed to grab their opponent. In order to deal damage to their opponents, they needed to be at point-blank range. The atmosphere in the stadium was quite good. On the other hand, the commentators Pan Lin and Li Yibo were in a not-so-good mood. Their faces had been slapped too hard. They still talked about the battle between the longest range and shortest range classes, cleverly shifting the topic to a discussion between classes rather than a discussion between players. That way, there would be no way for their faces to get slapped. It was a safe plan. Soon, the two characters met at the center of the cave. Su Ma-Cheng didn't hesitate. Dancing Rain immediately fired at him. Lu Boyuan didn't hesitate either and dodged. Facing heavy gunfire from a launcher, it would be hard for him to force his way through. However, Lu Boyuan didn't plan on doing that. After locating Dancing Rain, he began to survey his surroundings. When Dancing Rain started shooting at him, he had already planned out a route in his head. His chaotic cloudy mountain quickly hid behind a stalagmite. Stalactites and stalagmites were scattered around Dripstone Cave. In the previous fight, even though Jiang Batao was finished off by Su Ma-Cheng with one combo, he had showed a deep understanding of the map. If not for Su Ma-Cheng's electronic eye, it was hard to say how that fight would have turned out. Jiang Batao had utilized the map well, and Lu Boyuan wouldn't be any less familiar with it than him. However, compared to Jiang Batao, he knew about Su Ma-Cheng's electronic eye, so he was naturally on guard against it. Electronic eye was a small robot about the size of a ping-pong ball. If it just floated in the air the entire time, it wouldn't be too hard to notice. But in the last match, Su Ma-Cheng had the electronic eye drop down to a certain spot, making it much harder to see. The broadcast also knew that Su Ma-Cheng had this skill up her sleeve, so they kept a close watch by displaying her point of view as the main viewpoint. Before, they had only given a smaller screen in the corner. As a result, they hadn't noticed the electronic eye interface until the replay. This time, the broadcast was mindful of it. However, Su Ma-Cheng hadn't used electronic eye, even when Lu Boyuan hid behind the stalagmite. She didn't hurry and send out the electronic eye to scout around. Instead, Dancing Rain moved to the side to see if she could find Chaotic Cloudy Mountain from a different angle. With a turn, she was able to see half of Chaotic Cloudy Mountain's body. Dancing Rain immediately started shooting. Lu Boyuan had been paying attention to her, though. He shrunk back and retreated. Dancing Rain continued to fire as she pulled away. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain had retreated quickly, but Dancing Rain had promptly followed after him. Soon, chaotic Cloudy Mountain circled halfway around the stalagmite. On the other hand, for Dancing Rain to circle around that far, she would have to cover much more distance. If the two decided to spin around this stalagmite, Dancing Rain's radius would be 10 times that of chaotic Cloudy Mountain's. How was she going to keep up? As a result, Dancing Rain stopped. She aimed away from chaotic Cloudy Mountain and fired. The flames from the explosion burst forth in front of the stalagmite. Suma Cheng wanted to use the Aya from launcher attacks to hit him. Even though her attacks wouldn't directly hit chaotic Cloudy Mountain, they would still deal some damage. Unless Lu Boyuan wanted to just sit there and take damage, he would certainly expose himself sooner or later. Suma Cheng's plan was quite good, but it had been within Lu Boyuan's expectations. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain didn't stick close to the stalagmite. He was using it more as a way to block Suma Cheng's line of sight rather than to block her attacks. How much of Suma Cheng's vision was blocked depended on the distance between them. Lu Boyuan had a good grasp of this dead angle for Dancing Rain's previous position. He was using the dead angle to hide and move. Amidst the explosions, chaotic Cloudy Mountain had used the dead angle to get behind a different stalagmite. However, the viewers noticed that Suma Cheng had finally used Electronic Eye. She didn't use it to scout ahead but to circle around that stalagmite. That stalagmite blocking Suma Cheng's vision was also blocking Lu Boyuan's vision. She took advantage of that fact and quietly advanced as she attacked. Soon, the Electronic Eye got behind the stalagmite. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain had already left. The Electronic Eye circled around 2 times, locating the next stalagmite that chaotic Cloudy Mountain was hiding behind. Dancing Rain continued to move silently, but her movements had clearly quickened. This time, when she sent out the Electronic Eye, she didn't have it scout ahead. Instead, she had it take a different path than Dancing Rain to get a more comprehensive view of her surroundings. As a result, the stalagmites no longer blocked her vision. Suma Cheng had a complete grasp of chaotic Cloudy Mountain's location. Lu Boyuan once again tried to use Dancing Rain's dead angle to get to another stalagmite. A crosshair lit up at his feet. By the time he noticed it, it was too late. A heat-seeking missile crashed to the ground, and the ensuing mushroom cloud engulfed him. Dancing Rain came out from behind the stalagmite, her cannon aimed at the mushroom cloud, ready to shoot. Suddenly, a formless power grasped onto her and she was sucked into the mushroom cloud. Cloud-grasping fist. Suma Cheng had figured out what it was. The mushroom cloud dispersed. Qi was swirling around the palms of chaotic Cloudy Mountain's palms. From his stance, wasn't that the Qi Master's cloud-grasping fist? In the previous fight, Jiang Batao's plans had been ruined by Suma Cheng's Electronic Eye. In this fight, Suma Cheng's plans were ruined by chaotic Cloudy Mountain's cloud-grasping fist. The crowd erupted into cheers. Samsara's fans had been worried for Lu Boyuan because they thought that Suma Cheng had complete control over the situation. They hadn't expected a sudden reversal. How did he do it? The stadium's electronic screen did a replay, showing what Lu Boyuan had done. When the heat-seeking missile descended, Lu Boyuan had no intentions of dodging. He immediately activated reinforced iron bones. Even though this heat-seeking missile dealt heavy damage to him, because of his super armor, he wasn't sent flying away. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain used the explosion as cover for his cloud-grasping fist. No matter how many eyes Suma Cheng had, she couldn't have known about chaotic Cloudy Mountain's counterattack. Lu Boyuan had predicted that Suma Cheng's Dancing Rain would expose herself in order to make follow-up attacks. Sure enough, Dancing Rain came out from hiding. He immediately grabbed her, and in the blink of an eye, Dancing Rain was pulled in front of chaotic Cloudy Mountain. The distance between the two sides was now 0. Spinning throw. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain's movements were incomparably fluid. After pulling Dancing Rain in front of him, he grasped onto her firmly, twisted his body, and threw her into the air. At the same time, he also jumped into the air upside down, his legs wrapped around Dancing Rain's neck. Aerial twist. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain flipped around, sending Dancing Rain crashing to the ground. The grappler's relentless tossing had just begun. Chapter 1600 Tank Chapter 1600 Tank Translator Namyami Editor Namyami Spinning Throw Aerial Twist. Two skills in quick succession. Dancing Rain's health dropped in chunks like an elevator going down. However, the combo counter was only 2. For combos, grapplers were in an even worse situation than spell-based classes like elementalists, witches, spellblades. This was because of how grab skills worked. Other classes could rely on their experience and instinct to find a way to break out of a combo. But since grappler grabs could not broken out of, if grapplers could combo, then there would be no counter play. Long combos were very difficult to pull off with spell-based classes like elementalists and witches. However, long combos were impossible for grapplers. Let alone against a pro player, grappler combos were extremely limited even against a motionless sandbag. As a result, when looking at a grappler, statistics on combos were completely ignored. Using a dot attack to increase the combo count wasn't considered a combo, and chaining together skills couldn't be done by grapplers. Grapplers had to rely on reads to perform inescapable combos that the system didn't count. Aerial twist. Dancing Rain was ruthlessly thrown towards the ground. It was hard not to think of the character as the player. It was as if Suma Cheng had been thrown towards the ground head first. Thinking of how Suma Cheng's beautiful face would look like afterwards, even the Samsara's fans couldn't help but sigh. Lu Boyuan obviously didn't care. As soon as Chaotic Cloudy Mountain landed on the ground, he rolled and then stood up. As for Dancing Rain, knockdowns from grabs could not be quick recovered. She could only wait until her face slammed into the ground. However, Dancing Rain didn't immediately stand up. She lay on the ground and turned, aiming her cannon at Chaotic Cloudy Mountain. Boom! Light flashed. Suma Cheng's response showed her experience against grapplers. No matter how she got back onto her feet, her opponent would have a way to counter it. She had to attack first or use some other method to disrupt him before he reached her. Suma Cheng had experience playing against grapplers, but Lu Boyuan had taken her experience into consideration. Light flashed. A missile shot out, but Chaotic Cloudy Mountain suddenly dropped down. You think I can't hit you if you stay flat on the ground. How could Glory have such a huge flaw? Ground-sweeping attacks were meant for these situations. Even basic attacks had a ground-sweeping effect if they landed. Lying flat on the ground and not getting up wasn't an invincible buff. Elbow drop. Dancing Rain wasn't getting up, so Chaotic Cloudy Mountain might as well get down to the ground too. His elbow went straight for Dancing Rain's throat. Suma Cheng had been waiting for Lu Boyuan to attack. Dancing Rain rolled to dodge the strike. Suddenly, Chaotic Cloudy Mountain stretched out his arm. Elbow drop was cancelled and his hand grabbed onto her. One hand grab. Dancing Rain was suddenly pulled back. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain fell to the ground, but Dancing Rain was dragged back to the ground as well. In one fluid movement, Chaotic Cloudy Mountain rolled and got up. On the other hand, because Dancing Rain was knocked down by the skill, she was slightly slower. This was the foothold that grapplers needed to continue their attacks after grabbing an opponent. As for the side that was grabbed, breaking out from this hold was the key to taking back the initiative. And this was much more difficult for long-ranged classes like launchers. As a class that was extremely bad at close combat, having a grappler close in meant that she was already halfway to losing. Suma Cheng needed to bring back victory from defeat. Roll. Dancing Rain immediately tried to get up. This wasn't the smartest choice, but on occasion, choosing the bad option could catch the opponent off guard, making it a good option. But unfortunately, Lu Boyuan wasn't caught off guard. After chaotic Cloudy Mountain got back onto his feet, he immediately locked onto what choices Dancing Rain could do to get up. Lu Boyuan never overlooked the options that seemed bad and that no good player would choose to do. Ground toss. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain planned on pinning her back to the ground. Just when he was about to grab Dancing Rain's head, he suddenly heard a loud boom. Fire and smoke flashed from beneath Dancing Rain, immediately sending her to the left. She had used the recoil from her shot to bounce away. He missed. He missed his grab. He immediately rushed forward to try again, but the moment Dancing Rain dodged the grab, she aimed her cannon towards him. Boom, boom, boom. 3 anti-tank missiles at such a close range. These 3 missiles aimed towards 3 different points. It could be seen that she had complete mastery over this low-level skill. Dodge. Lu Boyuan had been ready for an attack, but the area covered by these 3 missiles had been outside of his expectations. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain tried to dodge, but he was still hit by one of them in the end. The explosion pushed him back. He had been wary of her attacks, yet he still hadn't been able to dodge in time. This time, Suma Cheng had blocked Lu Boyuan through pure technical skill. At this distance, Lu Boyuan wasn't able to keep up. With one of the missiles hitting, Chaotic Cloudy Mountain lost the initiative. The distance between the two sides started pulling apart, and a distance of 2 or 3 steps was already too far for Chaotic Cloudy Mountain to grab Dancing Rain. Dancing Rain hadn't completely gotten back onto her feet, but she was still able to leap back. The distance of 2 steps became 4 steps. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain had finally steadied himself and immediately rushed forward. But then Dancing Rain's cannon flashed again. I can't back down. If he were 10 or 20 steps away, Lu Boyuan might not have forced it. But the two sides were only 3 or 4 steps away. Even though he couldn't grab her at this distance, it was still favorable for him. He couldn't use grappler skills, but launchers were greatly restricted too. Their weakness of a slow firing speed was fully exposed, and there was no threat of combos from them. Forward. Lu Boyuan didn't hesitate. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain dodged. He had his body sway left and right irregularly as he charged forward to meet the attack. This wasn't a read. At the same time, Suma Cheng had no way of reading his irregular swaying either. This was a gamble. At this distance, it was impossible for Chaotic Cloudy Mountain to react once the artillery shell was fired. Dancing Rain didn't have time to make any precise calculations either. One attack. Everything depended on this one attack. If this attack hit, Chaotic Cloudy Mountain would be forced back and the distance would widen even farther. If the attack missed, Chaotic Cloudy Mountain would close the distance, and Dancing Rain would once again be within his grab range. Would the attack hit? The entire stadium went silent. Everyone watched as Chaotic Cloudy Mountain swayed left and right as he ran towards Dancing Rain. Dancing Rain aimed steady, yet there was no pull of the rigger. Although she was also retreating, Chaotic Cloudy Mountain moved much faster than her. She would soon be caught, yet she seemed to be waiting. What was she waiting for? Close. Reach out. Lu Boyuan hadn't expected Suma Cheng to not do anything. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain had closed in, his hand reaching towards her. Even if she attacked now, he should still be able to grab her, right? Probably right. Just before he grabbed onto her, her cannon suddenly lit up with a bright blue light. Not good. Lu Boyuan realized it, but it was too late. There was no explosion. It was just a sudden release of energy. The artillery shell flew out slowly, but it was flashing with blue light, crackling like lightning. X1 extruder. At the last moment, Suma Cheng had Dancing Rain used X1 extruder. It was a rare launcher skill with CC. Was this a read? A setup? No. It was another show of technical prowess. X1 extruder gave off light when used that warned the opponent. It also moved rather slowly. If she had used it immediately, even at a distance of 3 or 4 steps, Lu Boyuan would have easily dodged it. If it missed, Suma Cheng wouldn't have a second chance. Launchers had low attack speed. This attack speed wasn't referring to how fast the missiles flew, but rather the amount of time it took for them to reload and shoot again. Whether it was a basic attack or a skill, it required reloading. Launchers were slow because of this reloading process. No matter how fast your hands were, it wouldn't matter. The only way to speed up this reloading process was by wearing equipment that increased attack speed. Launchers couldn't combo at such a close distance because of this reason. Once they fired a shot, by the time they fired the next one, the opponent would have already closed in. As a result, there was only one chance. Suma Cheng let chaotic Cloudy Mountain get near her. She waited until he was about to grab her before launching an X1 extruder. Attack speed couldn't be changed through faster inputs. However, the input was what gave the command to use the skill. The faster the command was completed, the earlier the skill would be used. An X1 extruder one step away. Suma Cheng relied on this daring move to strike Lu Boyuan. There was nothing Lu Boyuan could do. Chaotic Cloudy Mountain was immediately sucked into the X1 extruder and then sent flying away. He could only watch Dancing Rain move farther and farther away. The effects of X1 extruder could not be disrupted.